The time is now 5:30 on Wednesday, November 16th, 2022, and this public meeting of the DC State Board of Education will come to order. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Interim Director Jew, please call the roll.
Representative Bernstadt.
Here.
Representative Burgess. Representative Wages. Representative Washington.
Here.
Representative Gasoy. Representative Chang.
Present.
Representative Wattenberg. Representative O'Leary.
Here.
Representative Parker.
Present.
Representative Sutter. Representative Sutter. I know that she's joined us via Zoom. I can see her, so I will mark her as present. Representative Thompson.
Yes, she is.
Present.
Representative Reed. And Representative Patterson.
Present.
Madam Vice President, you do have quorum.
A quorum has been determined, and the State Board will now proceed with the business portion of this meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there corrections or additions to the agenda? Okay. Seeing no changes, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. The motion being properly moved and seconded, I will ask for the yeas and the nays. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The motion is approved. We now have the minutes for the November 2nd working session. Is there a motion to adopt these sets of minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion being properly moved and seconded, is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, the motion is on adoption of the November 2nd minutes. I will ask for the yeas and the nays. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The motion is approved. All right, so good evening. My name is Ebony Rose Thompson, the Ward 7 representative and vice president of the State Board of Education. This evening, President Sutter has asked that I chair our public meeting such that she is only able to join us virtually. On behalf of the members of the DC State Board of Education, I want to welcome our guests and our viewing public to our third in-person meeting since the COVID-19 pandemic. It continues to be very exciting to be here on the dais with my colleagues. The State Board will continue to hold its regularly scheduled public meetings on the third Wednesday of every month in the old council chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. And we continue to work on ways to better improve our hybrid capabilities from this space. The meeting is currently being broadcast live via the District Knowledge Network, and a recording will be made available via the State Board's YouTube page at DC SBOE for the public to view later. This evening, we first welcome a panel to discuss education governance. In February 2021, the State Board established an ad hoc committee under SR 21-2 to research how the District of Columbia's mayoral control education system compares to other localities and survey and document public opinions of our current structure, culminating with a public report. I have been fortunate to lead and chair the Board Governance Committee's work and look forward to our panel discussion this evening on the importance of this topic. To date, the committee's work has been focused on improving how families, students, and educators experience the district's education system, as complex as it is, including transparency in education, government agency accountability, access to resources, and immediate support on school-related issues. Recently, the State Board conducted a district-wide survey and focus groups, preceding 8 takeaways from resident feedback that could eventually become State Board recommendations to be voted on at our December 21st public meeting. This evening, we have 4 invited expert panelists who will respond and react to these 8 takeaways as we consider who might be accountable for each and what structurally needs to be in place for each to be adopted. I'll be sure to share more on these 8 takeaways and panelists at the expert panel portion of our agenda. The State Board will also hear from a number of public witnesses as well. We look forward to hearing from you all in person as you share testimony on financial literacy and life skills curriculum, youth and parent voice, school holidays, outdoor education, over testing, school safety, teacher retention, community service hours, and many other important topics. I'm grateful to you all for being with us in person today, as I know that hybrid posture was not an option for this evening. The State Board will close our meeting with the consideration of 4 state resolutions on the early literacy priorities, recommendations related to public safety, community service requirements for high school students, and nominating our next executive director. I know that President Sutter will be providing remarks related to a number of these state resolutions this evening, so I'll be deferring to her later in the evening as well. Finally, as President Sutter has done, I want to note for the audience here and at home that the Committee of the Whole, chaired by Councilmember Phil Mendelson, continues to hold several hearings in the next months related to our work. On November 30th, there will be a hearing on attendance and chronic absenteeism, and on December 7th, one will focus on literacy. I encourage the public to learn more about these hearings on the DC Council website. I will now turn to and have the pleasure of welcoming our State Superintendent, Dr. Grant, for any opening statement she has tonight.
Well, thank you, Vice President Thompson. Thank you, Vice President Thompson, and good evening, board members and individuals joining us. I am pleased to join you and members to give an update on some of our shared priorities, and we'll be listening in on this evening's conversation. Before I dive into the topics that are related to our work this evening, namely community service, I do want to continue to provide you updates on our social studies standard revision work. We're really excited to be getting to our public release of our standards. We're working towards a mid-December release. I literally ran into the team working on it this evening. I don't know if you know just how excited everyone is about the work, and we're working really, really hard to meet the goal. My big update this evening, largely thanks to some support from you, Vice President Thompson, we have commitments from 8 out of the 10 content experts that are going to serve as our critical friends. This was an early recommendation from Vice President Thompson, as we wanted to make sure when the standards were released, we were getting local feedback, national feedback, a set of critical friends to push our thinking as we seek to have some of the strongest standards, not just in the district, but in the country. These experts have agreed to do a deep dive and review the standards and provide critical feedback as we help to make our standards strong. I'm thrilled by the quality of the experts thus far that have agreed to go on this journey with us, even given the context that we find ourselves in. They are among the top experts in the nation, including Dr. Annalisa Halverson, a preeminent scholar in elementary education from Michigan State University, Dr. Catherine Norris, the chair of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at Howard University, and just something I'm so pleased with, Dr. Chris Myers-Ash, the author of Chocolate City, has also agreed to be a critical friend as we go on this journey. I will have much more to say. Good evening. I will have much more to say on social studies before your next public meeting on December 21st, but really did want to provide you all an update on some of the friends we've brought to the table to go on this journey with us. It also was advice from Representative Wattenberg as well. And I wanted to share those updates with you all. Now I'll start talking about our community service graduation requirement. The DC Council waived the 100-hour community service graduation requirement for the past 3 years to account for the impact of COVID-19 and as it was related to children having access to community service. However, approving high school graduation requirements is one of the state board's enumerated functions, and so I prioritized bringing this issue to the state board at the beginning of the 2022-23 school year. We have worked closely with the State Board and particularly our student reps for the past 3 months to craft a proposal that staggers the reimposition of community service requirements over 4 years to accommodate for the impact of COVID-19 on service opportunities. As a result of our engagement with the State Board, our LEAs, school leaders, and other stakeholders, we propose requiring seniors to complete 12 hours of community service, juniors 50 hours, sophomores 75 hours, before having the current requirement of 100 hours fully reinstated. This will provide the needed flexibility to students who have had limited opportunities for service during the pandemic, the induced shutdowns or interruptions to learning. We want to make sure that we can maintain the commitment and values of having community service, but stagger it in a way that our current seniors can meet the objective, but also be prepared for graduation. In addition, our proposal will provide new flexibilities for students transferring from other states by requiring them to complete 25 hours of community service for every full year that they are in school in DC. This will bring us into alignment with our responsibilities under the Military Interstate Children's Compact, and it is the fair thing to do. Students who move to DC in the middle of their senior year should not be responsible for completing 100 hours of service in order to graduate. We also added a provision to ensure that hours transfer between LEAs for a student that transfers locally. Again, another suggestion we received from our student board representatives. Finally, upon the board's recommendation, we are more broadly defining what counts toward community service, including service completed as part of school-directed activities, government-led work, volunteer work with private organizations, regardless of tax status, and community service compelled by court order. Community service provides numerous benefits. It can simultaneously increase student self-esteem, help the community, and increase social connections and capital. As an increasing number of universities move to SAT optional admissions policies, it is more important than ever that our students have robust, community-oriented learning opportunities and experiences that distinguish themselves and make their applications more competitive. Our staggered community service hours requirement and broad definition of service strikes the appropriate balance of providing students with vital service opportunities while accommodating for the significant barriers to completion introduced by the pandemic. I appreciate, and let me underscore, appreciate the State Board's commitment to resolving this issue in a timely manner, and I look forward to the Board's approval of the resolution on community service this evening. With your approval, OSSI would begin to promulgate an emergency and propose rulemaking to codify the revisions of revised community service requirement. We will provide robust outreach to all of our LEAs, schools, and community on these changes, and will provide guidance to LEAs on implementation. Turning to literacy, Representative Chang, I know you all are planning on voting on a related resolution. I want to provide you with a couple of updates on the Literacy Education Task Force that OSSI is convening. We have contracted with a vendor to administer the task force and write the report. We have identified all 15 representatives of the task force, including Representative Chang from State Board. We and I, together, we look forward to hosting the task force first meeting on November 29th. The work of the task force will build upon OSSI's Science of Reading, aligned recovery investments, and the work that our Division of Teaching and Learning is doing to advance literacy and instruction and their outcomes in the district. And again, Representative Chang, thank you for the partnership, the work, and the journey ahead. I very much appreciated former Director John Paul Haywood's service and collaboration, and was pleased to see that he was recently honored by the National Association of State Boards of Education with an award for his unwavering commitment to public education. Undoubtedly very well deserved. Supporting you all and supporting OSSI is no small feat, and he did that work with distinction. I also want to acknowledge Alex Jew for seamlessly serving as interim executive director, even this afternoon. Thank you so much for the work you've done to make sure that OSSI is able to show up for the state board accordingly. I know that the board still has to vote to approve Ms. Bernice Butler as the next executive director, so I will be cautious with my remarks, but I will say that I am very much looking forward to welcoming Ms. Butler or whoever the next executive director is. I am confident that we will continue to build productive working relationships to advance the educational outcomes of the children in the district. Again, Vice President Thompson, members of the board, thanks for having me here for a couple of minutes this evening, and I will turn things back over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Superintendent Grant, for being here with us. And just your continued partnership on so many issues. And we actually probably have been remiss in properly thanking Alex for all of his time and support with us. Like literally, I don't think you all understand. So thank you, Alex, and thank you for getting us in order, right? So thank you for that. As I shared in my opening remarks, our expert panel this evening consists of 4 invited expert witnesses who will share their thoughts on education governance in the district. The system of education governance in the district is complex and nuanced. The state board has worked to better understand the needs of our residents in this area as we have explored, researched, and discussed this topic for the last year and a half. This evening, I am excited to hear from Dr. Joshua Glazer, Associate Professor, Education Policy at George Washington University, Dr. Elizabeth Grant, Associate Professor, Deputy Chair, Department of Educational Leadership at George Washington University, Mark Jones, former Ward 5 Representative, DC State Board of Education, Dr. Kenneth Wong, Director, Urban Education Policy Program at Brown University. We have asked each panelist to share on the structures that would promote the implementation of the 8 takeaways that were noted coming out of our district-wide survey and focus groups, as well as considerations for translating these takeaways into recommendations. For members, the panelists, and our viewing public, the 8 takeaways that the State Board has noted include: 1, district residents want increased clarity on the education system hierarchy and which agency to contact. 2, district residents are aware of some district education agencies and offices by name, but they are not aware of their specific roles within the education system. 3, there should be a central website with everything residents need to know about education and schooling. 4, a more streamlined approach to communication, more opportunities to give feedback, and greater transparency for how that feedback is utilized is needed. 5, community-based engagement by the State Board is key to raising our visibility and leverage us as a trusted resource. 6, there are immediate issues that need to be addressed by our system, including program quality in schools, mental health, bullying and violence, and too many tests. 7, district residents ask for restructuring education governance and power dynamics. And finally, 8, the education system in the district should focus on equitable funding and resources, access to well-rounded education, and school data transparency. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Glazer, Dr. Grant, Mr. Jones, and Dr. Wong to come to the table. Each of you will have up to 5 minutes, and then we will move forward to 1 round of questions from the State Board. Again, we are looking to each of you to help the State Board go from our takeaways to recommendations, and ask that you help us think about who in the district should be accountable for each takeaway and what needs to be structurally in place to best adopt each. We will begin with Dr. Glazer and then move from my left. Please begin when you are ready, Dr. Glazer. Wait, where's Dr. Glazer? Oh, I'm like, wait a minute, where's Dr. Glazer? So we're not going to begin with Dr. Glazer. We're going to begin, I guess we can begin with Dr. Wong, and then just move to my right. Yes.
Good evening. Oh, wow, it works. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here, Vice President Thompson and board members. And since the enactment of the Public Education Reform Amendment Act in 2007, mayoral governance of district schools has shown progress in academic performance, accountability, operation, and school quality. To support continuous improvement, the SBOE recently conducted an education governance survey to get feedback from parents and district residents on their experiences with the district's education system. And 61% of the respondents identified themselves as parents or guardians of a district student. Taking into consideration the responses of the survey and drawing on lessons from other urban districts, I believe that SBOE is well positioned to strengthen its capacity in several areas of governance, including ensuring representation of parental voices in a governance structure, empowering parent leadership, and enhancing public trust with parents, community, stakeholders, and taxpayers. I encourage SBOE to consider some combination of the following 5 suggested strategies. Strategy number 1, strengthen customer-driven operations and strengthen the culture of customer-based services. So SBO and OSSE can further prioritize their current parental and community engagement efforts. The Office of Communications and the Office of Customer Engagement and Deputy Chief Information Officer can all collaborate and broaden their effort to implement several actions suggested in the survey, including building a central website on points of contact, sharing disaggregated data, and sharing information on school climate, as well as services provided by external providers, and also ensuring that there is timely response to parental concerns. Strategies number 2, empower parents. Parent empowerment can be further integrated as part of the governance structure. Now, the district governance right now already offers many opportunities for parental feedback at a governing level. For example, OSSE's Parent Advisory Committee and the Chancellor's Parent Advisory Board. At a school level, parents are represented on the LSATs. Now, building on these institutional opportunities for parents, SBOE could increase its investment in leadership development for parents. Lessons can be drawn from such initiatives as Oakland Ridge, which empowers Black mothers to act on solution-oriented strategies to address the opportunity gap, and Denver's African Leadership Group that promotes civic engagement and economic integration for African immigrants. Working with community partners, leadership academies for parents could align SBO equity framework that empower parents with policy and analytic tools in advancing key areas of the framework. Suggested strategy number 3, invest in transparency. Transparency concerns raised by the survey respondents require 2 types of strategies. The first type of strategies relate to transparency in making sure that the available resources that would enable parents greater access to services. SBOE can lead in providing usable information to parents. MySchoolDC.com is a good example, even though not all public charter schools are participating. Tracking parental utilization of district and school information will provide important data for improving service responsiveness. The second type of strategy is related to how transparency can broaden public trust. These issues could range from clarifying the rationale behind policy and management decisions to disaggregating funding data in the audit reports. Since this information can be scattered across different units and entities, SBOE can serve as the focal point for advancing this work. And this work on building public trust could align with SBOE's equity framework, particularly focusing on student learning and academic outcomes, human capital representation, diversifying the workforce, as well as educator and team cultural competency and responsiveness. Strategy number 4, host listening sessions. Okay, a couple more. Okay, 5 more seconds. The Education Governance Survey highlighted the need for regularly held public forums or listening sessions. These events can be held at least quarterly at a school. And survey respondents particularly expressed their interest in meeting SBOE members in person in these meetings. Finally, suggested strategy number 5, provide targeted support in wards 7 and 8. The survey suggested the need for more targeted support in these 2 wards, 7 and 8. Survey respondents in these 2 wards generally showed a higher degree of dissatisfaction with the district schools. 72% of Ward 8 residents wanted more transparency. 44% of them reported bullying as a priority. In this regard, SBOE may want to organize for their very first listening sessions in Wards 8 and Ward 7 to talk about school climate and quality concerns, as well as addressing operational issues. In short, the district is now well positioned to take action to further strengthen parental leadership, engagement, and sustain public trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we refer to Mr. Jones as the Honorable still? Yes.
That's fine, yeah.
The Honorable Mr. Jones.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. It's a pleasure to be back here. I think it's the first time I've returned since I was a board member. And I think you have one remaining board member that I served with, Ms. Ruth Wattenberg. Thank you. I want to speak with you in reference to some of the takeaways, but I have some recommendations. These are all great takeaways. And I know the board is primarily advisory. However, that goes back before 2007. One of the iterations of our board actually goes back to 1996 as far as the transition for advisory, and that's when the control board took over our city, the management of our city, and at that point in 1996, they turned over the majority of the decision-making from the board to the CFO's office. Most of the important tasks, such as maintenance and things of that nature, contracts, and even more broadly, was turned over to other parties, CFO and the control board. After that, 4 years after that, we had the referendum in 2000. And that's where we came up with the hybrid school board. Mr. O'Leary, you recall that for sure. During that time, we came up with the referendum only because the mayor and the city council, the leaders of this city, could not come to an agreement on the role for the school board. So, thus we had a referendum, narrowly won by 750-something votes, where we had this strange, if you will, policy of representatives were representing 2 wards, 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, and the others were appointed. Yours truly had the I don't know if it was a welcoming task, but I ran the campaign for the hybrid school board. We were successful. However, if we had to do it again today, I would say that was not a very good experiment because I don't see the value of the outcomes for families and children and schools. That led us to 2007. And the mayor then, Adrian Fenty, of course, I thought was a good gesture. We brought in the ombudsman, but in 2009, he eliminated the ombudsman. I think the concept of the ombudsman then was a great idea, but it wasn't original. You should know that Mary Terrell, who worked under Chairman Wilson at the time, actually wrote original legislation for school ombudsman in this city. So the ombudsman in 2007 was not original. When I was elected in 2008 and set in 2009, we attempted to bring authority, budget authority, and things of that nature. In 2009, when we started, I think we had 2 staff people. And one of those, a third one we got from OSSI, which was detailed to us. So we didn't have the budget or the infrastructure to do real work, as you're doing now. So you're blessed that you have some infrastructure. We attempted to bring about the ombudsman. Several failed attempts, but we really started moving the ball down the field when Councilmember Catania was appointed as the chair of the Education Committee. Councilmember Catania was a very capable and able partner for this board. He picked up the challenge. He worked with me and several of our colleagues, Mary Lord and Laura Slover, and we were successful in getting an independent budget and bringing about the ombudsman. But during one of our listening sessions, during that time of going throughout the city and working with, I'll close shortly, a number of folks on what's important for the ombudsman and what it should look like, we realized the ombudsman wasn't designed just to advocate. So thus, we had the idea of creating Student Advocate's Office, which we did. 5 minutes isn't nearly enough, but be that as it may. So in closing, I have 3 areas I think this board can pick up the mantle and make a difference in this city with children and families that have to use our system. One, when it comes to budgets and things of that nature, our system should be based on a needs-based budget process for funding. What do I mean by that? Dr. Wu clearly stated most of our children that has to access our system are Ward 7 and Ward 8 students and families. Now, this is a tough discussion because no matter what, all over the world, no matter what, no one wants to hear about redistribution of resources because no one wants to lose anything.
Mr. Jones, now, I
Okay,
acknowledge you
I
as
get it.
honorable. What I will do, I will offer you, or maybe we can yield some time for you during the question period.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Dr. Grant.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to talk with you. I'd like to enter this conversation from the perspective of a popular idea. Some time ago, an economist, Albert Hirschman, wrote a book called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. His contention was that if people are dissatisfied with an organization, they have 2 options. They may leave or exit to express their discontent, or they may use their voice within the organization to encourage change. Both are valuable levers for citizens to use to encourage education improvements. In the district, we have established a very strong infrastructure for exit. About half of students have chosen to exit their neighborhood schools and enroll in charter schools. Similarly, across the country, charter schools and private schools are seen as exit options from traditional public schools. And DC has one of the nation's most developed charter sectors. Less well developed here, and in districts across the country, is the infrastructure and activities to facilitate the expression of voice. The State Board of Education has established this government's committee, as you mentioned, to consider how families, students, and educators experience education in DC and how to improve that experience. From the surveys and focus groups, the residents mentioned, among other things, increasing transparency, providing opportunities for meaningful educator, family, and student feedback, increasing the state board's community-based engagement, and ease of navigation through the DC education agencies. How then does the state board help structure voice? I suggest that the single most important action that the state board and other agencies can take to increase voice is to solve problems together. This doesn't mean just gathering stakeholder input. Rather, it is sitting together shoulder to shoulder to dig deeply into local problems and define them carefully, to truly understand the community context into which any solution would land, to then puzzle out the solutions and define the support that is needed to make the work successful. I don't believe this approach is new to DC, but it is not part of the district infrastructure. I put forward this one recommendation with the recognition that it is very difficult to do. Developing and implementing policy solutions that solve public problems is the stuff of books, articles, and graduate school courses. In addition, doing this as a community rather than as a top-down bureaucratic system is even more complex. It not only takes the political will to share decision-making with a broader community, but the structural capacity to engage together over time. Solving problems together requires new ways of doing business at the school level, which is the primary contact for families according to the survey, and at the district and state level, where overarching decisions are made. I know this is happening in pieces here in DC and elsewhere. My suggestion is to build the infrastructure necessary to solve public problems from more places and more often. I'd like to share two stories to help illustrate what this might look like. The first is from here in DC. I know you know the work of City Tutor DC. City Tutor was established recently in 2021 to coordinate the implementation of high-impact tutoring as a response to pandemic learning loss, and they've used the Annenberg research briefs to guide that work. The City Tutor Group has since helped coordinate tutoring programs across hundreds of sites. What's important is the way they have done this. Because integrating tutoring into the school day is complicated, they created design sprints, which were 5-week learning sessions with school leaders, teachers, and stakeholders to work out the kinks. A design thinking approach is people-centered and focused on creating and testing innovative options. The second story is from Kentucky. Kentucky recently started a United We Learn initiative to develop a vision for the future of education in the state. In a creative approach to including diverse views, about 1/3 of the operating coalition was appointed by the State Office of Education. 1/3 was chosen through an application process, and 1/3 of the coalition was invited randomly from among citizens in a process akin to jury selection. The coalition was intentionally more racially diverse than the state as a whole. Then, using a design process, the groups gathered data through empathy interviews, surveys, and a listening tour. The coalition then created a vision for the future and a learning agenda to get there, and now they have local laboratories of learning to carry on the work. I want to pull just a few lessons quickly from this. Each represents a design thinking approach, a method of problem solving that puts people and their needs at the center of decision making. Each created an inclusive design structure that brought multiple participants with their varied knowledge and experience to the table. Each built support and ownership because it included people's ideas and their lived experience in the decision making. Each put in place structures for shared learning, and each worked with partner organizations to get the work done. Ultimately, each created an architecture for meaningful voice. One idea of power is the ability to take one's place in the conversations that are essential to action and to have one's part matter. This is what it means to have voice in education policy. I think the State Board of Education, along with the other offices, can continue to build policymaking infrastructure in the district that facilitates inclusion of multiple viewpoints, co-creates solutions, co-produces programs, and that gives a real seat at the table for DC's educators, students, and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. And then finally, Dr. Glazier, where I started.
Thank you. Remind me never to follow Dr. Grant at one of these events. Good evening. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to discuss issues regarding transparency, accountability, and the role of the State Board in DC education. I am a professor of education policy at George Washington University's Graduate School of Education, Human Development. My own areas of expertise are around systemic improvement of education systems, the role of governance in improving educational outcomes, and the entailments of strengthening teaching and learning in high-poverty environments. In regard to the issue of DC education governance, I'll offer a few thoughts. Like any type of governance arrangement, mayoral control involves trade-offs. In theory, mayoral control allows for more centralized policymaking, avoids constituent-driven decision-making that is characteristic of school boards and different than what Liz was talking about, and enables education policy to be integrated into other social policies such as housing, welfare, and youth development. Mayoral control has been attempted in several cities, though research does not offer clear evidence as to its effectiveness. But even if the advantages of mayoral control are realized, they come with certain costs. One is that it weakens the link between education policy and voters, in that mayoral elections incorporate a great many issues beyond education. A vote for the mayor, in contrast to a vote for a school board member, is not necessarily a sign of approval for his or her education policy. Sometimes education takes a backseat to other issues. Second, greater centralization of authority inevitably raises concerns about executive power, transparency, and accountability. It's nothing to do with the individuals who may occupy a particular position. That's simply built into that governance arrangement. This concern, though, does take on considerable weight in D.C., where the district's independent status means there is no state oversight, as exists in other male-controlled education systems. For example, whereas the mayor of New York City exercises considerable control over the city's education system, New York State represents a type of check on that authority, as evidenced by the lengthy negotiation between Mayor Adams and state lawmakers regarding the continuation of mayoral control in the city. In the district, then, it's important to ensure that the potential advantages of mayoral control are not totally offset or undermined by a lack of transparency and accountability. And here's where I think the State Board comes in. It is my view that the State Board of Education can potentially play a productive role in this regard. Specifically, the potential of the State Board to convene the public and experts, its potential to collect and disseminate data and findings, and to ensure that public discourse is informed by accurate and objective information is critical. Toward that end, it is critical that the board have access to a wide array of information about the system, and that it's timely, that it's able to obtain that information in a timely fashion. It would also be beneficial for the State Board to have the capacity and resources to commission independent research on topics of public interest and relevance. These functions should not be subject to the approval of the mayor's office, as this would undermine the perception of the State Board as an independent entity. The extent that the State Board can work in coordination with the recently established research practice partnership led by the Urban Institute, that would further contribute to this agenda. Note that the State Board does not need formal decision-making authority to enact the functions I've outlined here. Rather, it can play an important role simply by ensuring that the public has access to reliable and relevant information about the education system, and that public discourse is informed by that information. This is critical for two reasons. One is that in a democratic society, the public deserves to know about the functioning and effectiveness of publicly funded systems. This is particularly true in regard to local education systems, which is typically the largest municipal budget item. Second, efforts to improve the system by those working in schools, the central office, and the array of non-government organizations that work with the system depend on knowledge about internal processes and outcomes. It's important to stress that the goal of public reporting is not to attack education officials or undermine support for public education. at a time when the legitimacy of public education is increasingly called into question, when educational issues are increasingly politicized, and when teachers and principals are under attack from various ideological groups, public reporting must be conducted with the explicit and transparent goal of supporting objective discourse and improvement. A few more seconds. Indeed, it requires little effort to find fault with urban education systems or to broadcast various anecdotes that further erode public support. Thus, the State Board should assiduously avoid adopting a partisan, ideological, or inflammatory disposition. Objective independence and empathy for those who work in schools and the central office should be the prevailing ethos. Finally, I'll close by saying that improving large bureaucratic public systems is a long-term endeavor. Very. Searching for quick fixes or dramatic turnaround is tempting but ultimately counterproductive. I say this because the role of convening the public and providing it with reliable information will not lead to immediate improvements. Moreover, it will be difficult to identify tangible signs of progress. However, it will be critical to persist in this role and to act under the knowledge that if public education in D.C. is to improve, it will only do so because there is an informed and engaged public that demands better schools from its elected officials. Thank you.
Thank you all. Mr. Jew will now call the round of member questions. Each member will have 4 minutes. 4 minutes. A reminder to members that the 4 minutes includes, and to panelists, that the 4 minutes includes both time to ask the question and the panelist's response. We will begin with any questions from President Sutter, since she is joining us virtually, and then move to the student representatives.
Thank you, Vice President Thompson. I think President Sutter was having a power outage at her hotel, so I'm going to read her question for the panelists. President Sutter says, "We've heard some feedback from the public about a need for a full governance structure overhaul, perhaps as dramatic as reversing the shift to mayoral control. How would you suggest the board respond to such calls as part of our work on governance?"
I want to toss this to Dr. Glazer over here, who studied mayoral.
Well, that's a tough one. Let me find a couple ways to dodge the question. One is that we do have a tendency in public education to jump from solution to solution rather than investing the time to make our current effort, initiative, or even governance structure work. So adopting a new system or governance structure absolutely, positively will not cure the most serious problems that the system is confronting. And I would be concerned about it actually detracting attention from that. So perhaps a more productive path forward, because we're not starting from a clean slate. The question is, imagine we have nothing, what would we adopt? The question is, where do we move from where we are currently? So my inclination is to say that time and energy and resources better spent will be figuring out, how do we make this system work for us? How do we balance between the advantages of a mayorally controlled system and the needs for transparency and accountability? Because if we went to another system, that system will bring problems too. Locally elected school boards are no panacea for educational problems. They would bring just a new set of problems that would have to be managed. So let's maybe not fall into the trap of just jumping to the next solution, but rather putting all hands on deck and trying to figure out how do we make this one work.
Well, I want to say categorically, I do not support moving away from mayoral control at this time. I've experienced several iterations, and as Dr. Glazer mentioned, not only observing other places, it's not a panacea of whether mayoral control has been successful. However, In the last 8 years, I have seen more significant progress made under the current situation. Now, that could be for many reasons. Maybe because we have a better council, a better board, and a mayor that's collaborating. I can't speak to that, but my biggest concern is, as Dr. Glazer mentioned, a reversal might be a reversal for our system and families.
Since I'm not a DC resident, I'm looking at it from a different angle. And what I'm seeing in the DC system is very complex and multifaceted. And that is that you've got executive leadership in the form of mayoral control. You've got voices right here in the State Board of Education. And you've got exit, as Professor Grant mentioned. There's a tremendous, enormous structure on charter schools. So you actually have three pillars. You have three pillars going on at the same time. Executive leadership, choice, and voice. From my perspective, it's almost like the ideal balance. That is that oftentimes the major criticism of mayoral control is that there's a lack of voice or a lack of choice. That is, if you have such a strong monopoly of executive power, then you kind of lose sight of accountability from voices and choice. But in DC, you actually have the proper balance right now. So I would not, I would agree with Professor Glazer here that, instead of distracting the energy and the attention away from, continue to maintain this very appropriate balance from my perspective, and really focus on the enabling conditions that students and teachers would need to do their job well, then I think that's kind of this balance is, from my perspective, an appropriate balancing act right now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wong. We'll move to our student representatives next. Representative Bernstead.
Before you start.
Oh, sorry.
So let's do this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's not change the clock. Let's keep the clock at 4 minutes. We're going to give you 5 minutes because that bell seems helpful, okay, for the question and the response. So essentially we are having 5-minute rounds, but we are not changing that clock because if I put the clock at 5, then y'all are going to go to 6. So I just want to make that now.
Okay, noted. Representative Bernstead.
Okay, thank you so much all for your time. I have a question that's kind of spurred by Dr. Wong's testimony, but I don't think it's just for him. You mentioned number 5 is provide targeted supports in wards 7 or 8, and I think I have 2 questions here. Is that specific to targeted support around board governance or just generally? And also, I know one of the things the board talked about specifically last meeting is that while we have different opportunities to engage, sometimes they're not utilized to their full potential. So how do you suggest that we conduct this outreach such that we have people coming and participating? What can we do to make it more accessible and also, just more accessible generally, I guess?
Thank you, Representative. The recommendation number 5 is to really targeted support. In a way, it aligns nicely with Mr. Jones' suggestion, and that is that redistribution may be necessary. Redistribution of resources and attention and people's power and staffing resources may be necessary in terms of the way that we're picking up on the sentiments from the respondents in the survey. So, and in the testimony I mentioned that 72% of the Ward 8 residents wanted more transparency, 44% complained about bullying problem, and 42% really wants to have opportunities to have more in-person interaction with the staff as well as SBOE representatives. And so they really are sending us a clear signal in this survey that these are their demand, these are their desire, these are their preferences. And the way that the system needs to respond is to move resources to where the needs and the preferences are. and to address the climate issues, the bullying problems, transparency problems. They really express loud and clear in the survey. So that's what I was suggesting in, so it's a more holistic, it's not just transparency, it's a more holistic capacity building, and to make sure that those services in Ward 8 will satisfy the expectations of the parents, and that the SBOE members would have the opportunity to actually go there and visit the schools and be able to listen to what they have to tell us on a regular basis. So that's what I was suggesting in this recommendation.
Okay, thank you so much. Do any of the other panelists have any other thoughts on how we might be able to incentivize engagement, even if, people are telling us they want to respond, how to make sure that we're communicating well and making sure that the places we're having these meetings are accessible? Is there anything we should keep in mind?
I really do want to double down on the idea of solving real problems together. I think that brings people to the table. There's a real difference between listening and engaging. And there's something about people's lived experience that they can bring to the table that's a different kind of evidence than the research and data that we tend to produce from a university or a research firm, but is as valuable, if not more so, than the other, because it gives you the context in which you're trying to implement solutions. So I really think working around real problems, the ombudsman could go in and work with how to present data well to families. What are the best ways that families want to receive that? The Office of the Student Advocate could go in and work with different groups locally about how do we solve bullying problems in that local area. There are a lot of different ways to do that, but that's my recommendation. I think it incentivizes people to feel like it matters.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm good on questions.
I will move to Representative Washington.
Hi, thank you all again for coming out today. I didn't have any questions, but I did want to yield my time to former Representative Mark Jones because I know you wanted to continue what you were saying earlier.
Could you repeat that, please?
I wanted to yield the remainder of my time to you so you can continue what you were saying earlier in your initial speech.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. It's not an inside job, by the way. So I have three areas that I think the board can take a lead on. As I mentioned, needs-based budgeting. Primarily, most of our students reside in Ward 7 and 8. And again, when I was speaking about redistribution of resources, it's very, very hard for any of us to lose funding. But if we clearly want to make a difference in our system with our children and families, we've got to give the greatest amount of resources to where the greatest need is. That's a challenge. And I think that this board can take a lead with the mayor and the city council on working on a budget process that helps do that. That also depends on the data. And that speaks to the transparency of the data, which is another topic. I'd like to see more transparency in the data. Now, those of us that are involved in this work, we know how to find the data. And we know what to look for to find out where the problems are with the subgroups that impact our system. But it's not readily available to our families and folks trying to navigate our system. And it would be great if, which is a third topic, is, and this is low-hanging fruit with the website, you could develop a website, as your takeaways suggest, that's universal, so a person can access services and direction. It's not easy trying to figure out if you're a family, who to call for what issue. Just isn't. It's not simple for those of us that are involved in the process, like yourselves. So if we can do something with a website, I think the board can take the lead on that and work on the transparency. It will help with better decision making. Thank you.
Can I just add one specific suggestion? We have the equity framework that I believe Representative Parker was quite actively involved in. And one way to look at it is that how are these resources supporting the area of focus in the equity framework, particularly in Ward 8 and 7? That is, are the resources being pushed and moved towards supporting those three big buckets of work? And then you can kind of benchmark and document and track and disaggregate the data. But the benefits for Ward 8 children and residents would be huge if we could continue to maintain that tracking system.
I think that's a very good point, because it's really easy in public education with the best of intentions to spend money unstrategically. So going hand in hand with that notion of redistribution is a strategic plan. And I'm basically just reiterating what Dr. Wong said. But I would be I think there'd be much more public support and a much greater chance that money would be used productively, efficiently, and strategically if it was part of a strategic plan about how to use it. I'll just also add, that's the potential of mayoral control. If you want that system, we know it brings some costs, but it also has some potential. And the potential is to combine different public services in an integrated way, which is hard when City Hall has one agenda and then there's a school board and they're not really coordinated. But when you bring it under one roof, which is one of the purposes of mayoral control, there is at least the potential to integrate public policy. So really important to then actually take advantage of that potential in this way.
All right, I think we will move to Dr. O'Leary next.
Thank you all very much. I have a quick question for Dr. Wong, and that is, you talked about Oakland and Denver have these programs. Are they involved with the local Board of Education? I just need a yes or no, really.
Yes. So the strategy that they have is kind of a cross-sector collaboration, because each of these organizations have an interest in education opportunity, but also economic opportunity.
But are they involved?
And so they work with the board as well as the mayor's office. And
Okay,
some of the
I'm cutting you off because that was the answer I needed, because the problem with what we have in DC is we don't have the funding or the access to be able to do that. It's a great idea. And I think that all of you are talking about the same thing, and that is that in order for our school system to be fruitful, there has to be coordination between the executive, between the council, and among us on the state board, who are the representatives of the community. And all of the other things, you talked about transparency and getting information out and things like that, but we can't get the information out if we don't have the information. And we know that we've had a lot of problems just trying to get information about how many teachers left the system or how many people are in the school buildings on a given day, which is really accessible to everybody. So I think that what I'm hearing from all of your testimony is the only way we can become successful is for the government to work together. I mean, when we talk about an ombudsman and a student advocate, DCPS should have an ombudsman and a student advocate that's working. It shouldn't have to come through that, but that's not working right now. And how do we fix that? And you've got a minute and a half.
Very quickly, I think, so the School Board of Education is the advocate and the kind of perhaps the agenda setting in this area, engagement, you set the agenda, and then you kind of push it to the Deputy Mayor of Education's office and start kind of coordinating cross-entity collaboration, and then start, using some seed money, because ESSA funds at the district and the states that I work with around the country right now, they are actually creatively using some of the ESSA money to jumpstart some of these innovative, collaborative initiatives. And hopefully, that might be some opportunity. The other way is to actually build new relationship with foundations. And I know that in the DC area, there are quite a number of foundations who actually have an equity focus and an engagement focus and civic engagement focus. So that could be another potential areas for collaboration.
You used the verb push. The problem with the push is that sometimes it's Sisyphean. I'll stop. I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Dr. O'Leary. Next, we will move to Representative Chang.
Thank you. So Dr. Grant would love your help to distinguish and how you would suggest distinguishing between design thinking methods that do it just for show versus those that execute it with fidelity.
I think the people involved would be the best measure of that, meaning their experience would be the best measure of it, like you've measured here with the surveys and the focus groups to find that out. There's definitely a difference that way in how things are done. So there's, in any initiative, that more surface and showy way, and design thinking is a little bit the cure du jour, a little. But it also, if we think about it as maybe less around that showiness of having people there and more about a way to solve decisions that is different and fits for a complex world. It is a system that puts that empathy and user at the beginning so that as policymakers you begin to look at the context in which your policy is landing, that implementation piece. And then it has prototyping and testing. It has this iterative feature at the end. Our typical decision-making models are, and I've been part of this kind of policy where you write it up, you spend a lot of time on it, and you hand it off to somebody like it's a football and say, good luck running that down the field. In a design process, if the process is run well, it continues to be that one of feedback and working together so that, as one designer said, the creation of feedback loops is the great challenge of the 21st century. And creating those feedback loops with people and trying to improve the policy, like Dr. Glazer was mentioning about mayoral control, rather than just charting a new course. So you're right, that's an important thing to pay attention to, but there are organizations out there doing it in ways that matter for real policy. Kentucky's doing that with their assessment and accountability system. I mean, how they're choosing to test their children and to hold their schools accountable is a design process with a broader public. There's opportunity for it, but it's a good caution.
Thank you. I have a similar question for you, Dr. Wong, and distinguishing between parent engagement that does it well and those that do it also just as a check mark.
You mean to differentiate between what is considered as intentional and purposeful engagement as opposed to just, showing up, right? So I think coming back to what Dr. Graham was talking about, authenticity is very important. That is, that there you can break it down into different dimensions. One is, do parents actually have full and complete access, barring from confidentiality, right? We have FERPA, we have all these confidentiality agreements on data. But barring from that, do they actually have full and timely access to the information that they need to be decision makers? Number one. At the school level as well as the overall district institutional. Number two is that can we build a degree of ownership? That is, if they get to co-design and work together to identify the problems that everybody can work together to solve, then there's a likelihood of them developing that ownership, a sense of ownership. And number three is advocacy. That's why I'm suggesting investing in leadership development. So we can create a leadership for parents, leadership academy for parents across all 8 wards. And we can start with a call of 32, and that's, financially speaking, that's doable, and is, from a managerial perspective, the payoffs could be very high, because then you actually cultivate the parental leadership within each of the wards to actually start taking ownership and advocacy and, really come out to work on behalf of their children.
Thank you.
All right, next we're going to move to Representative Parker.
Thank you all for being here. I am going to focus my questions on Dr. Grant and Dr. Glazer, but I do want to acknowledge Mr. Jones, my predecessor. I often say this is in part the house that Mark Jones built. And Dr. Wong, thank you for your testimony. I really appreciated the nuance of some of your recommendations. Dr. Grant, I really appreciated this idea of learning labs, innovation, using the board to facilitate voice, public voice, but there is a willingness factor. And I think about the Kentucky example you give. There is a willingness to invite, at times, differing views. And in a mayoral control system, there may not always be that willingness. And so how does one facilitate public voice and discourse, especially around the most controversial topics, when that willingness factor is not there? And maybe it's a legislation thing, I don't know, but.
I am hopeful rather than certain that doubling down on democracy will help. I think school board meetings in this pandemic time will be an indelible picture of how awful things have gotten. I think that kind of discourse right now is worrisome, and I don't have answers to it.
That's fair.
But I do think the approach of engaging deeply with people is the only option we actually have. And that means on difficult topics that may need to be facilitated, as well as on simpler things that are more locally based within a school or have less impact elsewhere. I also think you're touching on the thing that will prevent this, which is people have to give up power.
Yes.
And giving up power around the decision making. That too, I think, comes with practice and an understanding of a policy-making role as one of a facilitator to help get to a good decision, rather than only a decision maker and having sole power over those decisions. I know that's an inadequate answer, but.
No, that resonates with me, and I would go one step further, a decision maker that only seeks the voice of those who agrees with them. Dr. Glazer, I wanted to come to you in thinking about New York as an example, and I really appreciated the reference there. And to me, it highlights, for me, it's not a question of do you have mayoral control or governing school board. There's a lot of stuff in between there, and I think New York is a great example. And in DC, I guess the question is, in terms of the expanded parental rights in New York, where part of the negotiation, I'm getting in the weeds, but part of the negotiation is that parent voice was going to be amplified through these small governing panels. How might that look in DC?
Perhaps like how it looks in New York. Before we went to New York, as Dr. Grant was speaking, I was thinking that Mayor Bloomberg.
Can you speak into the mic?
Mayor Bloomberg and Chancellor Klein at the time had an enormous amount of authority over the system, but there was successful pushback from the public. It was led by some nonprofits, but they were clearly had harnessed the voice of
Yes.
the public around a few issues, and they were able to actually push back on some of his authority and get some changes in the legislation. I forget, I don't remember the exact details, but it was a sort of successful reclaiming a little bit of that authority away from the mayor. And the organizing body, I think there's two important lessons from it. One is that there was an organizing body. In this particular case, they were nonprofit organizations, but it doesn't have to be. But the second, that they were able to really harness public opinion, and that's what was behind their authority. So that general notion that allowing the public to speak, that becomes hard to ignore for elected officials. So I think power to the people.
I agree with you. Do I have 30 more seconds, or am I over?
You have 30 more.
Oh, 30 more seconds. So just to make clear, it's my understanding in New York, there's the mayor, there's a board. The mayor has a lot of control over that board, but there is a board. Then there are these parent panels that have a say. Then there's City Hall, as well as the state legislature. Now, obviously, we wouldn't be able to replicate that in DC, but I just underscore that I don't think this choice of school board versus mayoral control is the only option. I'll give you the last word.
There are certainly many different versions of it, and I think you're right that we want to present it as a sort of dichotomy between a traditionally elected, locally elected school board and an all-powerful mayor. And there are certain, in between compromises of those two. I would just say, and I think this is consistent with what Dr. Grant was saying and others, that the power of public voice is, even if it is not a formal authority that elected officials have, is enormously powerful. And so, that sort of back to that earlier question, should we change the governance structure? And I know there were some concerns about the sort of authority of the mayor in this system. I just would not underestimate the potential impact and power of an informed and engaged public.
That is my time, I'm sorry. But thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Parker. Representative Patterson?
Thank you. I had a question, and I wanted to really talk to the dean of the state board, but he stepped out, Mr. Jones, because he's such an awesome person. So, so I would like to direct my question for you, Dr. Grant, because I'm going to try to ask probably a controversial question, because we talk about school governance almost just pointing to one side of the fence when we know that we have a charter sector that doesn't get talked about a lot, but our parents don't understand that there's this bifurcated kind of governance over them, that there's another board and they hardly ever go to those meetings. So when you talked about design thinking approach and inclusion decision structures, if you could you give me an idea of how we bring that together, so to speak? How I know that that the charters are governed a certain way and they're structured by Congress and everything like that. But if we were going to redesign that so that it worked for parents and parents really understood it and they had a voice, what would be some of the recommendations? Because they don't see it as a bifurcated system. They see it as a system, as an ecosystem that goes together. What would be some of your thoughts on how we bring them into that discussion, give them more power, gives the state board even some more, power into what happens with the charter schools, which we're held accountable for, even though we have no authority over it?
Yeah. That may be the legislative fit somebody else mentioned. I think there are a couple pieces to this. One, I think the data that's provided is inadequate for parents. When we provide a dashboard that shows achievement levels, parents don't decide schools based on achievement levels. I had the chance to do a study here in DC on personalized learning. We held a focus group, and the participants were just eager to talk to each other, to get the skinny about what the different schools offered. They were parents of special education kids, and they just didn't know where to go. In the old neighborhood structure, you'd ask your neighbor, what teacher should we have for third grade? But you don't have that kind of thing. So there has to be built an interaction system that's more direct with parents than just technologically through a web. I actually think it has to be in person that way. That, again, is an infrastructure thing that I think needs to be developed over time. The other piece is that I think the great failing of the charter system generally is that the promise of it was that it would share information, it would share learning back and forth. I think that bridge is missing, and it's missing here in DC, which is a shame, because there's a lot going on, and I imagine the charter structure will stay fairly close to what it is now. But building that bridge and that requirement that the schools themselves talk to each other and share that information with parents, I think that's an important piece.
Thank you so much for your response.
Representative Reed.
Thank you all. I'm going to ask one question that's very fundamental, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page, or at least hear the page that you're coming from. What is your definition of mayoral control? And my second question is, for all the reasons that even you just listed about our bifurcated system, Representative O'Leary listed, the fact that we often hear community voice and have great barriers to address the needs that we get directly. We have some constituents that will say no, that mayoral control is not effective. So I would like your response to that. So it's actually two questions. What is your definition of mayoral control, so we can be on the same page, or I can know it? And then two, the feelings that constituents are saying related to maybe this isn't the system that they want to work under.
If I had to point to one single factor that defines mayoral control, it's who appoints the superintendent or the chancellor. That's an enormously consequential decision, because that person then basically implements, has control over an enormous array of educationally important decisions.
Did you say and or? I couldn't hear you. Did you say and the chancellor or the chancellor?
No, the chancellor. The ability to appoint that person is an enormously consequential decision that has a lot of educational implications around curriculum, instruction, hiring, leadership, and so forth. Now, there are other factors, too, and as I said earlier, the gray areas, but if I had to point to one thing, that would be it.
My quick definition is that mayoral control allows one single office to be held accountable for a very complex system of service delivery and resource allocation. There's one single office, and every 4 years we'll review whether the mayor is doing a good job in education or not. And within that, there is clarity of accountability. That is who is doing what and things like that, because the mayors could kind of leverage a lot of these office resources and power to actually make that work. But then the trade-off is that do we have enough checks and balances? So the city council here is kind of serve that role, serve that function, in terms of budgetary control and monitoring and hearings and auditing. But then the state board, being the only major elected entity in the education K-12 space, can play an extremely critical role, because the power of the voice, the public voices, lies within the state board. So it is really not just one single office being held accountable, but then whether the other offices are also doing their responsibility seriously and intentionally to hold that voice, to hold that office accountable. Right?
And Dr. Wong, you hit on something interesting about the possible change every 4 years. So how do you protect if there is a Mayor Wong and a Mayor Jones, and keeping the consistency between the mayors?
So that's where I think the city council could actually exercise a tremendous amount of power to kind of, in the interim, right? There will be progress report and auditing and audit exceptions, and if there are some irregularities, then the office of the Attorney General or Inspector General could actually come in and then fix some of the problems.
All right, next we're going to move to Representative Wattenberg.
Thanks to all of you for being here, and I do want to say something special about Mark, which is thank you for sending us that. And it was great serving with you for my first 2 years. So I regret that this was framed a bit at the beginning as totally reversing, as though the big question is, should we be totally reversing this? Nobody that I know wants to totally reverse this. The question is, but all the responses have been, oh no, we shouldn't totally reverse it. I know most of the people at this table do think there are issues that need to be addressed, and that's what I want to get to. And I want to just remind people, while we're all talking about how all the good things have worked, this is a district that had, I think, the single greatest high school graduation scandal in the country, because people in the schools were pressured to give bad information, to lie about attendance, and to pass on students for graduation who weren't ready. It had a similar scandal around student suspension, where people in the schools were pressured to deny that suspensions were going on. So we have some issues here, and that's what I want to focus on. And Josh raised it explicitly, Mark, you raised it as well. We don't have checks and balances the way other mayoral control districts do. And I want to hear some specifics about, if we want to fix that, what should we do? What are the, I mean, Josh, you talked about some data and transparency. What specifically should we as a state board try to have as an authority? Like if we went to our city council and said, everybody here agrees, we have problems with checks and balances and accuracy and transparency. Here's how other states provide a check on the data and the honesty from their districts. What should we ask them to put in place? That's really what I think.
Well, if my associates on here don't mind, I think there's one thing that is I've always believed that the superintendent can be appointed by the mayor, but I think the superintendent should report to the board.
The chancellor or superintendent of OSSI? Superintendent of OSSI.
Because that way, that gives the state board some control over making sure that the superintendent is reporting the proper data and not hiding data. Not that I'm suggesting that that's happening, but I'm a numbers person, and we know we can report data that paints a different picture than what reality is. So that's, I think the superintendent should.
Just to add to that, I think if the state board could determine the measures, the data that needs to be collected, and what the specifics are for what those numbers, what that data means, the definitions behind that data.
Determine what data gets collected.
What data gets collected, yep, and presented.
There are different types of data. So one are, people refer to as administrative data, data that's collected systematically on student learning outcomes, attendance, suspension, and so forth. But there's also another kind of data of people in the system, people who interact with the system, sharing their experiences. That's also data. With any type of data, you have to be thoughtful in what you infer from it and the lessons you take. It doesn't matter if it's quantitative data or more informal data like this. So, and specifically in regard to your earlier point, Ruth, I know you said in the past that some of these scandals may have been a shock to the public, but they were open secrets inside the schools. So it makes one wonder if there were a safe, protected space to engage people for the board inside the schools, to let them talk, to share their experiences, whether that would have, and that's also data, whether that would have the check or the accountability function that you seem to be implying is missing.
Before you give it up, we have another 2 minutes, right? No. Oh, that's it.
Your time has expired, actually.
No, I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Representative Gasoy.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel. Mark, it's nice to finally meet you. We walked in together and I didn't know who you were, so hello. So I just want to second Representative Wattenberg's concern about sort of the current system as it is. I think that I wasn't here for the transition as a parent, but now I am a parent with a child in the schools. I navigate it. And I will say that the system, you know, several of you have talked about sort of what potentially could be, and I agree, like there's potential for instance, the system of choice to create more equity, but it hasn't, and that's been documented, right? And there is potential for mayoral control to create more accountability, but it hasn't, right? And so my question, I guess I really liked, Dr. Grant, your description of infrastructure and activities to facilitate the expression of voice. And what I'm bumping up against is sort of, it's like a chicken and egg problem here, right? I think the way our system was set up in 2007 was to make sure that things were airtight and that we would have continual improvement. And so it's a culture issue now, right? Where there has to be continual improvement at all cost. So what I'm getting at is we are really focused in DC on looking good above actually doing what's right often, above authentically, that was a good word that was used, engaging the stakeholders, right? So my question is, how do you deal with the culture issue now that it's entrenched? If we don't, you know, I think there's broad agreement about not total overhaul, at least not right now, not immediately. So gradually, or maybe instead of an overhaul, what do we do to address our culture problem, to evolve? Maybe that's a way to look at it. From having to constantly prove that we're doing great all the time, to being more authentic, to engaging more authentically. I know we're not the only district that grapples with that. So I'm just wondering if you know of other states, other districts that do it better.
I don't know if people do it better, but I do think the public accountability function that is held in the state board needs to be strengthened. And that we were just mentioning the data and the transparency that way, that's how to hold that up to the public. I also think this idea of engaging the public voice around around that information grants power. There's a question of whether or not activities cause behavior change, or your thinking, the change in your thinking, or if you have to have change in your thinking before you can change your activities. I think sometimes if we force activities, we change thinking over time. So I think engaging in those activities is a way to start.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll follow up.
You have 1 more minute if you want.
Oh my God. All right. So, what's that? Yeah. So, did anyone else want to take that on to answer that? Like, what should we do about our culture? Or, you know, are there states that do it better than us? Are there ways that we can address the chicken and egg problem? I think I appreciate what you said, Dr. Grant. Like, we can sometimes change it through activities, but it can also feel like going through the motions. And that's what we hear from our constituents a lot, is like, I feel like I was asked here, and they've already made up their minds, and it's checking off a box. So
think the public consequences in our world today more generally, as well as here in DC, prevent people from telling the truth. So if there are ways to start championing the truth and keeping people in positions, even if they have a bad message, or a difficult message to deal with, that becomes part of the culture. Again.
Yeah, how do you do it? Yeah. I appreciate it. My time's up. Thank you so much.
Vice President Thompson.
Okay. My first question is actually to Mr. Jones. And I want to get another question in, so let's move quickly. What I did not hear and I want to hear is, can you talk about what problems we were trying to solve when we made the move to a hybrid school board? Like, what was our problem? What were we trying to solve for, in the public's point of view? And the same when we made the move to ultimately the structure we have now.
Well, I think the issue that we were attempting to solve when we moved to a hybrid school board was basically what everyone is looking for, which is improved education on one hand. But on the other hand, the other problem that we were attempting to solve is that publicly, most people thought that school boards were dysfunctional. And so we believed we could correct that dysfunction by the referendum for a hybrid school board, by electing board members, and quite frankly, we were very careful in choosing people who would run and supporting them financially. And then we chose the other 4 appointed school board members. So we thought we could resolve both issues by a hybrid school board. We didn't solve the problem, quite frankly. I don't need to tell you that, you can see that. So no problem was solved, but that was our attempt.
Okay, that's helpful, because I asked because my assumption is we should be thinking, a lot of times it is framed as, do we want to go back to what we had, or do we want to keep what we have now? I would argue we should ask ourselves, like, what problems we're trying to solve now, to use Representative Gasoy language of evolution, to evolve, to get closer to how do we better not just educate our students, but make our education landscape one that people can navigate, use, serves them well, right? I am curious if you would agree that one of the things, to the point of like activities around engagement or supporting families in engagement, if anyone has comments on structures that we should be putting in place to support engagement, because one of the things I've heard from my constituents that is lost is when there was and I was a kid then, but when I used to be able to show up at a local school board meeting, no matter what was on the agenda, and say, hey, like, this is what I need addressed, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. And that way the public could set the agenda. But where in our system does that happen now? Or is there some type of structure we need to create to allow for public input and feedback in agenda setting? Not response to, but agenda setting. And if the answer is you're about to tell me it doesn't exist right now, that's a valid answer too. I'd like that on the record.
Could you repeat that?
No, it wasn't my turn.
So we don't have anything in DC that allows constituents to show up and set the record, like set the agenda in education?
Are you asking whether we have that?
In our system currently, structurally?
I do not think we have.
Okay. Do you think we would need that? I'm sorry, Dr. Glazer, you said charters.
I would assume, because this is typically the case, that the charter schools have parent boards that have some voice and some ability to at least contribute to the agenda, only because that's the idea of charter schools, that if they don't satisfy their customers go away. So when you say DC, since half the system is charter schools, that half, there will be some variation between them, but probably many of them do have a structure where parents can, have their say. Maybe there's something to learn there for DCPS.
And then a quick yes or no. I'm not going to debate that issue, but a quick yes or no. Do you all think the board has the capacity it needs for the accountability question? Like if we were to make changes around the data transparency, do we currently have the capacity we need? Yes or no from each panelist? Just a yes or no. Yes, you do.
I don't believe you have the legal structure at this time to do that.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Well, when you say capacity,
Yes or no? My time's up.
I
It's
think
fine.
you need more infrastructure.
That's capacity, but my time's up.
Well, thank you all very much, Vice President Thompson. I think we're going to move to a short recess and then public comment soon. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I'm going to gavel us out
Thank
for the
you.
recess. 5 minutes.
Testing.
Members, if we could return to the dais so we can get ready for the public witnesses would be great. Thank you. Members, if we could return to the dais to get ready for public witnesses.
For me to call the witnesses? Or do they just have to be in the room?
I mean, you could, everybody's here. I mean, you could start. I will call the witness, sorry.
Here we go. At every public meeting, we hear testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. Your comments become part of our official record. If you would like to speak at a future public meeting, please sign up on our website at sboe.dc.gov or contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov or by phone 202-741-0888. Tonight, we have 17 individuals who submitted public testimony. We will hear from those in attendance in panels of 4 to 5 people. Each witness will have up to 3 minutes to provide comments. Please note that you must use the microphone at the table. The microphone should already be on. The timer light on the table will be green for the first 2.5 minutes, will turn yellow for the last 30 seconds, and will be red after 3 minutes have elapsed. After our public witnesses speak, we will pause for questions from board members. Members will have 2 minutes for questions for our public witnesses, and those 2 minutes include their question, comment, and their answer. Mr. Jew will call the public witnesses to the table, as well as the question rounds. We will also assist with the timing to ensure our witness and board members do not exceed their allotted time. Mr. Jew, you may now begin by asking public witnesses to come forward to the table.
Thank you very much, Vice President Thompson. We'll start with Jim Trengrove, Harold Thomas, Alejandro Gabriel Rosenberg, Sally Schwartz, and Allison Ferruti. All right, I don't believe Allison is here, so we will move Emily Wack. All right, perfect. Let's start with Mr. Trengrove.
Thank you. Is this on?
That one, it does work. The audio is a little bit faint, so we may need to just pass the wired mic, which is not ideal, but we'll do that.
My name is Jim Trengrove. I am director of Foolproof Foundation's Walter Cronkite project. Foolproof was created 18 years ago by a group of young people and the legendary journalist Walter Cronkite. My background might not be as legendary, but I did have a 35-year career as a broadcast journalist, the last 21 years as senior producer for politics at the PBS NewsHour. What attracted me to Foolproof is that it recognizes a fundamental flaw in how financial literacy and life skills are taught. Corporations that fund and shape the major financial literacy curriculums today are the same corporations that make money when young people make mistakes. Honestly, can corporations that make money when kids make money mistakes be expected to teach kids how not to make them? Are they teaching kids to question the very products and services they sell? I don't think they are. The result, young people are not taught the essential skills they need to survive and thrive in a world driven by relentless marketing and misinformation. Foolproof is here today to offer educators an online curriculum that can equip district students with financial and life skills that work. Foolproof teaches young people to become healthy skeptics when it comes to anything that impacts their financial or personal well-being. We teach young people to fight impulse buying, to question advertising, to recognize when they are being manipulated online, to question the messages of social media influencers. And Foolproof teaches skills that help young people recognize the difference between real news and fake news. Our curriculum also can lighten the load of your already overworked educators. Our curriculum is web-driven and turnkey for teachers. Because of our unique approach to teaching, we are the only major financial literacy and life skill curriculum in America that is endorsed by Fair Play for Children, Public Citizen, the National Association of Consumer Advocates, by the Consumer Federation of America, and Children's Screen Time Action Network. We believe students in the district overwhelmingly will want to take a deep dive into our curriculum because it is straight up and truthful, it is peer-to-peer teaching. Students are learning valuable lessons from young people not much older than they are. I had the privilege of spending a day at St. Francis Xavier Academy in District 7 with Principal Harold Thomas as he was testing the Foolproof curriculum. Mr. Thomas will share his experience momentarily, but I remember the faces of the students, the intensity, their focus, and their genuine excitement at completing the test. Mr. Principal Thomas and I are here today to ask your help in giving Foolproof a chance. We suggest a district-wide test of Foolproof's curriculum by sample of students in DC's middle and high schools. And we are asking that every school evaluate Foolproof's curriculum in just one 40-minute session. We hope this can happen during 1 week this spring. And then let children decide if they want to study Foolproof's curriculum. And if they do, Foolproof will provide our full middle and high school curriculum and all supporting services at no cost. And very importantly, we will customize our curriculum to meet any guidelines or requirements the district may adopt. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Thomas?
All right, thank you and good evening. My name is Harold Thomas. I'm principal at St. Francis Xavier Academy in Southeast Washington, D.C. As you know so well, the responsibility of educators is often to tell kids what they need to know, how they're going to study, and how they're going to learn. After my team reviewed the Foolproof Foundation's middle school curriculum last May, we decided to do something different. We decided to ask our kids if they wanted to study Foolproof's curriculum. We asked our students to work through a Foolproof module and then tell us anonymously, do you want to study this? Here's what our kids told us. 94% of our students said they would be more careful with money because of what they learned in that one online module. 81% said they would like to see more of the Foolproof program. 86% of the students said their friends should know about Foolproof. 59% said they would like to explore the program more on their own. 83% of our fifth graders said Foolproof should be taught at our school. And as impressively, 86% of our kids said that grown-ups in their lives would be helped by Foolproof. 2 of our teachers were involved in the pilot test and had already reviewed Foolproof's online modules prior to the testing. Here's what our teacher said about Foolproof after the test. The modules are easy to use in our existing classes. The Foolproof curriculum requires minimal preparation for teachers because students register themselves and tests are self-graded. Students can work at their own pace in the classroom or at home. Teachers can follow a single student or the whole class from any online device. Students like the deeply interactive nature of the curriculum and like Foolproof's peer-to-peer format. Kids just talking to kids. We are just one school, and we work with this over the course of one day. But I am here this evening to encourage you all and all educators in the district to consider the value of the Foolproof curriculum for our school community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. Next, we'll move to Mr. Rosenberg.
My name is Alejandro Rosenberg. I'm a Ward 3 DC resident. I have 2 children in DCPS, one at Murch Elementary School and the other at Deal Middle School. I understand that this board does not set the DCPS calendar. Nevertheless, I'm here today to ask that you exert your considerable influence on those who do to help make major religious holidays a citywide school closure. I submitted written testimony earlier this week, so I'm not going to read that verbatim, but I did just want to highlight a couple of things from that. Specifically, the district should join all its neighbors and close schools on the first day of Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur, so those observing these holidays are not prejudiced by missing valuable class time. Indeed, those days result in school closures in PG County, Montgomery County, Arlington City, and Arlington County, and I'm sure many other districts in the DMV. I just didn't have time to look them all up. In addition, many non-parochial private schools close on those days. DCPS does not. This forces Jewish students, teachers, and staff to miss valuable class time, to their and their students' detriment. Many of the surrounding public school districts also honor the Muslim holiday of Eid, as well as the Hindu, Jain, and Sikh holiday of Diwali by closing schools. DCPS does not, even though many of its students, teachers, and staff also observe those holidays. Look, I don't speak for all the Jews in the district and for any members of any other religion, but I am confident that those who do observe these major holidays would not object to their recognition. DCPS is getting rid of the much maligned February week off in 2024. Why not take those days off and allocate them to these 4 holidays? Doing so wouldn't change class time, and since there are already days off now, wouldn't further burden those who rely on schools for childcare or other necessities. At a bare minimum, DCPS should take major religious holidays into account when scheduling days off for other citywide events. For example, this school year, just last month on Yom Kippur, it fell on October 5th, which was a Wednesday. It was followed by a teacher workday on the 6th, and parent-teacher conferences on the 7th, and an Indigenous Peoples Day on October 10th. Obviously, the 10th is a federal holiday, but there's no need to have many children miss about a week of school in the first month of class time. Even more troubling, DCPS held a citywide cross-country meet on Yom Kippur, which prevented Jewish athletes from across the city from participating. This shouldn't happen and is easily preventable. My 11-year-old daughter noted the other day that it would be a great message for the public schools in our nation's capital to close on 2 major Jewish holidays. Doing so would be a powerful statement, particularly now as anti-Semitic acts are on the rise across the country and in the news almost every day. The same is true for Eid and Diwali. Recognizing these holidays would help further the district's commitment to cultivating a welcoming environment for all students while leveraging inclusivity and education to provide valuable teaching moments, as those unfamiliar with these traditions can learn why the holidays exist and are observed, and thus combat prejudice and bias. Thank you for your time tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions or help in any way moving forward as we try to get the powers that be to recognize these holidays.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosenberg. Ms. Schwartz?
Good morning to members of the, good evening, sorry, it's a short day. Members of the board, thank you for this opportunity to testify. I'm Sally Schwartz, Director of Globalized DC, a local nonprofit that works to increase access for DC public school students to global education, language learning, and study abroad opportunities. This is International Education Week. The good news is that in many ways, DC has been in the forefront of international or global education. Some LEAs are doing groundbreaking work, such as DCPS's Study Abroad program. But in more ways, we are just scratching the surface of what is possible and what is needed. Global education and language learning in DC are characterized by very deep inequities in access and a failure to see what's right in front of our eyes. A global city filled with jobs requiring global competencies which our own young people can fill, and they are not. Part of the way forward will be to change what gets taught in schools, and this is why we're very interested in seeing the draft of the social studies standards. But I've also come to believe, based on decades of work in this field here, that it's time to stop limiting students to the courses offered within the 4 walls of their individual schools. especially when those course offerings are not equitably distributed across schools and neighborhoods. We need to build an educational landscape that can open up access to a much wider range of learning opportunities, especially for high school students. This could mean creating publicly funded educational hubs or building partnerships with community-based institutions. As you go about your current work of rebuilding post-pandemic public education in DC, we hope you will consider ways in which new credit-bearing courses and other programs outside school could augment in-school learning for any public school student in DC. I have 3 specific recommendations. 1, 3 times the state board has voted for competency-based credit for world languages in DC schools, which would allow students to earn academic credit for languages learned outside school. Neither OSSE nor DCPS has moved forward to implement this policy. We hope we can work together in the new school year with you and OSSE to finally push this policy forward. It would be transformative. 2, beyond languages, in social studies and other disciplines, let's move beyond the field trip model to create a pathway for legitimate external entities to develop full-fledged for-credit elective courses that could be accessed for free by students from any public school. And 3, more broadly, how do we connect individual students and educators to free opportunities that exist outside the schoolhouse doors? How do we create systems that facilitate communication, support connections, and allow students at all schools to benefit from these kind of opportunities? This is the challenge that many of us from outside the system face, and we think that there are systems that could be put in place to make this sort of connection better.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz. Ms. Wack?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Emily Wack, and I am the parent of a kindergartner at Murch Elementary School. 3 weeks ago was my daughter's very first field trip, and it nearly ended in an unspeakable tragedy. The driver of one of the 2 buses of kindergartners carrying 44 children and 2 teachers had to be forced to stop after popping a tire and running the bus into a ditch. Parents waiting anxiously for their children learned only hours later through the news the driver was drunk, more than 2 times the legal limit in Virginia, that it was not his first DUI, that none of the drivers or replacement drivers sent by the DCPS-approved vendor were licensed to drive a school bus, and that there were 18 safety violations with the school buses themselves. While we are all beyond grateful that our children and teachers returned without serious injury, this near tragedy exposed serious flaws in DCPS's vendor oversight and compliance with existing background check laws for school transportation vendors. I recognize that matters of school transportation vendors are perhaps not the usual purview of the State Board of Education, but I believe this is an issue of transparency and accountability, much like we were talking about in the earlier session. And I ask that the members support DCPS parents and the DC Council's efforts to pursue change and accountability from DCPS. Field trips present valuable educational opportunities for our students, and all DCPS parents, students, and teachers should be able to rely on DCPS to ensure their approved vendors meet basic safety requirements. The way that DCPS addresses the problems exposed by this incident has the potential to impact key State Board of Education priorities, including equity and principal and teacher retention. DCPS has been vague about both what went wrong and how they're going to correct the problem. We're awaiting additional promised follow-up, but DCPS has committed to reviewing its field trip policies and to reviewing its transportation vendors on a more regular basis. I believe it's appropriate for the State Board of Education to be involved and have a voice in this process, to advocate for equity for our teachers and principals, and for the safety of all of our children as DCPS reviews its vendor transportation and field trip policies, and I hope that they will help amplify parent voices as we seek accountability from DCPS. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wack. Right now, we will move to member questions. As a reminder, members will have 2 minutes, and that is inclusive of both the question and response. We'll start with our student representatives. Representative Bernstad. I will also note President Sutter indicated that she does not have any questions for this panel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your time. I don't think I have any questions. Other than Ms. Wack, I promise to think about different ways the board can engage with this. I'm not sure exactly what an answer is, but I promise that I will think about it. I just want to speak to Mr. Rosenberg's point that, like, this is not a new issue. I am Jewish. I took off for Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and I missed so much work. Like, I spent days making it up, and I couldn't do the work on those days. Like, those are days that I'm observing religious holidays. And it put me significantly behind, to the point where, like, I was failing classes because I missed so much work. I missed important tests, and it's just not fair. A lot of times we kind of situate this conversation as it's important for Christian students or non-Jewish students to learn about our religion, but that's not really what it is. It's important that Jewish students and non-Christian students get the same respect as Christian students. So it's not just about visibility of our holidays, but just that we also deserve this time off, especially when, and I have talked to teachers about this, I have talked to peers about this, like, there is a rise of anti-Semitism in DC schools now that has just gone unaddressed because Jewish students are never addressed by DC public schools, DC public charter schools, really any education agency. And I think it's something the board should commit to working on more, because especially like when big public figures, I'm thinking of like Kanye West, are saying just horrible things about Jewish people. We know our students are hearing these things, but there's virtually no support for Jewish students, and refusing to give us like actual time off. Like, yes, it's an excused absence, but that's distinct from having the day off of school. And I think refusing to give us that time off just kind of sends a message to our Jewish students that in a world where there are virtually no supports for us, like, school agencies aren't going to be there for us. So I just urge the board that this is something that we really consider, I don't know, something to do moving forward.
Thank you, Representative Bernstad.
I know that wasn't a question, sorry.
Representative Washington.
Hi, I wanted to thank you all for your time again. Honestly, Leave took like every single word out of my mouth that I was going to say, so I concur with all of their points, and I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Representative O'Leary.
I have a question for Mr. Tringrove and Mr. Thomas. How does the diocese feel about the program? And I'm asking that question because of getting something in DCPS or in the charter schools, they have to go through certain organizations. I'm just wondering how that happens. And I only have a little bit of time, and I've got one more question. So,
okay, so I'll be quick. Having worked in DCPS and the diocese, it's different. I did have to get some clearances, not the same level of red tape, but to answer your question, they support it, they approve it, and they even advocate for me to be here this evening to talk about it.
great. We've been working on this financial literacy for about 3 years now, I think, on the board, and no one seems to be listening, or it's not on the front burner, put it that way. The other thing I'd like to just mention, and this is not off topic, but I would like to make sure that the next year that we have a resolution recognizing the Jewish holidays, because as far as I'm concerned, we haven't done that yet. And just because of what Representative Bernstad was talking about and what's going on in this country, that I think it's very important that we as a board recognize that. I'll yield my time.
Thank you, Representative O'Leary. Representative Chang.
Mr. Rosenberg, thank you for testifying. This was an issue that first came to my attention at Seton when I was visiting and had a similar, a parent share a similar story of the cross-country race. And it's an issue that I've been looking into and found examples from, in addition to the school districts you cited, rural, urban, county, and state systems that have these holidays, and they all range in actually percentage of students who identify as Jewish. So it's not necessarily just about the size of the population. And I've also been looking into Diwali, Lunar New Year, and other holidays that our students celebrate. If Leave very eloquently answered the why, I'll share a bit about the how and would appreciate your advice in moving forward. So what we've been finding is that, so first, DCPS school holidays are set already for 26, 27 academic years. And they name a process, they name their process for how holidays get recognized, but don't have currently a transparent process for how parents, educators, the rest of us have a say in naming an additional school holiday. So that's something that I am particularly invested in looking into and would appreciate if we can keep in touch about.
Thank you, Representative Chang, and thanks to everyone else who said nice words too. And I hope I'm happy to be of any help I can be. I've been in touch with some Jewish organizations that have worked with other districts in the DMV on recognizing the 4 holidays that I mentioned. And Lunar New Year certainly is just as important to so many people and should be on the list as well. And that gets us 5 days, the same amount as February break, which they just took away. So I think that it's, at the bare minimum, there shouldn't be tests or things or projects due or school-wide athletic events or things like that occur on these days. I mean, the DCPS calendar does note that these are holidays, but then that's completely ignored when they go off to schedule things. I know, for example, this cross-country race that occurred on Yom Kippur, the field that they did it on was in Montgomery County. I assume that's because Montgomery County was closed for Yom Kippur and it was pretty cheap to rent the fields, but that's not the best reason to have something that's on the holiday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Parker?
No question.
Okay. Jacques left. Representative Reed? Thank you, Representative Gascoigne.
Yeah, it's okay. I was like, I'm just gonna wait for my cue. The parent, can you give me your name again? I'm bad at writing these things. Mrs. Wack. Thank you. I appreciate the testimony. That was definitely something that was constantly brought up immediately around after the event. But I was curious about what else needs to be done in regards to follow-up. I know there is a pretty large audit of vendors, but what else do you want us to support you and other parents with? And B, I have homework for you. Please submit that exact same testimony during oversight season. You probably don't have to make any changes because it was very well stated.
Thank you. Some of the actions parents are specifically hoping to see is, number one, a retrospective look at what happened, what went wrong, why was this vendor approved, when was it approved, when was it last looked at, and really understanding the details of how that process went awry. Number two, we'd like to make sure that there's transparency in past field trip incidents, that parents who were using this vendor perhaps this academic year are notified, and that there is clarity about past incidents that perhaps didn't rise to this level of attention. And finally, we'd like to see concrete commitments about how the process is going to be improved going forward, particularly with attention to how background checks with drivers is being reviewed and approved. And I think a particular role that this council could take on is how teachers and principals are being utilized for that. I know as a short-term measure, the school is having, or DCPS is asking schools to verify driver's licenses from on day of field trips. It strikes me that that might not be the easiest or best allocation of our educators' time, and that they aren't the best situated to be making that confirmation.
Representative Wattenberg.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. I'm going to have a problem. There's so many things I want to comment on here. First, it's 3 minutes? Oh, it's just 2 minutes. Well, then I'm really just going to comment and say this, that on the Jewish holidays, I'm a DCPS former parent, and our kids were in the school and were Jewish. There was, for a very long time, there was a pretty serious policy at DCPS that no, we weren't going to make it a holiday, but there really wasn't going to be any work that you couldn't easily make up. There weren't going to be field trips. There weren't going to be athletic events and so on. And I think part of what we've learned with this meet, with the track meet, is that first of all, with that action, we see that it's not being taken that seriously, but also lots of people are now coming out of the woodwork to say, oh, well, and actually that was true last year too, they did this, or actually at this school they did this. So I think that policy, which I think once upon a time was pretty well abided by, isn't, and so something has to be done. I like the idea of trying to provide the holidays for everybody. I'll also say it's a diverse country, it's a diverse city, and I am interested in how we do that, and if that really is the best way to do it, rather than going back to the policy and enforcing it, and I'll be interested in talking to Representative Chang as well about that. Let's stay in touch. I'm the Ward 3 rep for 2 more months. Okay, so that's you. I want us to Ms. Wack. I know that everybody here would want to be part of helping to elevate that. You know, all of the policy authority on that is at DCPS or potentially at the council, but whatever we can do to lend our voice to that and our support, sure we'd want to do it, and maybe, as you were saying, have a hearing on it. And it's a little similar on the transparency stuff, some of what Representative Reed has been dealing with on the sexual assault, where something happens, you know it happened, and nobody gets told. And Ms. Schwartz, I love what you're saying, and I'm sorry I don't have time to comment on it, but yes.
Thank you, Representative Wattenberg. Representative Gasoy.
Thank you. I'll pick up where Representative Wattenberg left off. So thank you, Ms. Schwartz, for coming and for, always coming to advocate for a more well-rounded education and a real-world based education. And I think that I also kind of hear that theme from Foolproof as well, that it's so bizarre to me that there isn't more emphasis on that, but especially now when our democracy is really shaky and kids need those skills more now than ever, and where else to do it but in our nation's capital. So I am in full support, as you know. How we get, as you pointed out, I think this follows well from our last panel, unfortunately, that the state board hears from folks and we make recommendations, and there's we have no authority to make it happen, but we can keep pushing, and on your end, you can keep pushing for the state board to have more authority. So, Ms. Wack, I have a clarifying question. So, first of all, I'm so sorry. I can only imagine how terrifying that must have been. You mentioned advocating for equity. Can you clarify what the equity aspect was in this case?
This is an issue that affects all DCPS schools.
Yeah.
One of my concerns is that solutions are getting implemented on a school-by-school basis. But all our kids need to be safe on all their field trips, on all their trips to sporting events. This shouldn't be something that's dealt with by individual school resources. It needs to be a top-down solution.
Thank you. And Mr. Rosenberg, thank you. I guess I'm just wondering if you have heard back. I know you emailed, I think, the chancellor, and my time's up. So, but maybe we can just connect offline. I've also heard this is a problem with after-school sign-up and out-of-school time sign-up, that it opens on Jewish holidays. So, yay. Okay.
Thank you, Representative Gasoy. Vice President Thompson.
Thank you, panel, for everything this evening. First, points well taken on financial literacy. Good to see someone from the Archdiocese today, because I don't get to see Catholic school people anymore. Second, holidays, my 2 cents. There is a comment period, even though the calendar is set. Representative Chang is absolutely right. But this short-term issue of scheduling on the days, please raise that as part of the calendar period for DCPS. I don't know how charters handle that issue, but I would assume charter DCPS is the same issue. So that's my 2 cents. Transportation, Ms. Wack. I am wondering, and we'll follow up to see if we could adopt something similar to whatever OSCE is doing for their screening, because I would assume that they should be screening their drivers, and if we find out they're not, that's its own issue. But this whole verification school by school, that's a no, hard pass on that for me. And then Sally, if you could use my last minute to just describe the global hub idea. If you could use my last 54 seconds to describe the global hub idea, that would be fabulous. Good to see you.
Yeah, so actually, I don't know if you're referring to an idea we had several years ago to put it in Ward 7. But we talked, the idea is that if you look at languages specifically, some schools, particularly larger schools like Wilson, has maybe 6 or 7 languages that they're teaching. If you go to another school that's smaller or east of the river, you might only have the option to take one language, and it might not go to AP. Yet, there are students all over the city that, for one reason or another, are interested in a variety of languages. So rather than try to get the teachers in the school, let's create a hub, publicly funded or a combination, to where students can be transported and take language and other specialized courses that are not in their schools.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate you being here this evening. We'll move to our next panel of public witnesses. Allison Ferruti, Mia A. I don't have Mia's last name. Kay Bennett, Senorita Lake, Sophia Barada, Angela Anderson, Lucia Applequest, Danita Denise Davis, Louis Lambert III, and Alex Moncada. Okay. And because I was reading the names very quickly and didn't associate them with those that are here, I know we have Mr. Lambert here, Senorita Lake, right? And then Sophia? Okay, perfect. Senorita, we'll start with you. Yes. Oh, the time should be set at 3 minutes. Thank you, Vice President Thompson.
So, thank you all for hosting this meeting and listening to the public, to teachers, and everybody that's talking. It's important that you listen. So, I'm coming today not as a teacher anymore. I'm taking a break because my health is very bad, and I've been dealing with some personal things. However, I am coming to you guys as a person who really cares about the kids. I'm advocating this year with my group on civic engagement, getting our, like, what does it mean to be a product of the DC schools, right? I know that we have a lot of zip codes and difference in money, I get it. I grew up poor, but I also know that DC being a global city, our kids deserve better, and they're not giving you the same answer. Like, when I speak to youth that I mentor, where they're in Ward 1 or Ward 8, there's a different experience, and that's not cute. That's not good at all. How is it that we are in the city where global decisions are being made? However, our kids are not acting like global leaders. I went to school to be a diplomat, and I fell in love with education because I feel like the DC educational experience should be in alignment with diplomacy. Kids from Ward A and Ward 1 don't even know each other. We need to set a standard. So what we're working on, because we're going to be coming here a lot, what we're working on right now is we want to start getting cohorts of children across the wards, where we're going to be meeting in libraries, starting December 16, exactly a month, so we can start having conversations on what do you want the next cohort of children in the DC schools to say? Like what are we doing with the children? We could be teaching right now the next mayor of DC. We could be teaching the next global leader, the next big influencer. But is that child going to feel compelled to come back into their community to make sure that kids that look like them and are from the same zip code are like seeing the representation? It goes beyond race for me and zip codes. It's like I'm an immigrant, and where I'm from, education is a privilege. And here, education is free. Equity is not authentic. There's no equity. I had to quit my job as a teacher because I'm exhausted, and I'm going to do my work with the youth to see what is the product that we're doing with the education, because I'm confused. That's my time.
Thank you very much. Sophia, you're next.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sophia. I'm a proud teacher at Henley Elementary, Ward 8. I'm also a co-chair in Empower Ed's Opportunity Team, and a WTU and DC Corps member. I'm here to talk to you about chronic absenteeism, its status both in my school and district-wide, along with its negative impact on student success. The district pressures schools and teachers to provide consistent data for progress monitoring, along with other forms of testing. In some cases, such as schools in Cluster 2, teachers must monitor students weekly. DCPS Central Office goes through the phonics data, but they continue to ignore the staggering numbers of chronically absent students. While Henley's average is higher than the district's overall, 37% of DCPS students are chronically absent. That is actually an improvement from last year, which was at 41%. In fact, only 44% of the district students attend school for at least 95% of school days. So over 1/2 of the district students are not consistently attending school, which does not even address tardy attendance and early dismissals from school as well. Yet teachers continue to be the scapegoat for lack of academic progress as a district. Where is the DCPS district-wide model for how to connect with families and how to help foster a healthy desire to learn? Chancellor Fairby himself noted that excellent teaching happens in wards 7 and 8. However, he also noted unless we encourage students and families to trust the environment, which can happen through consistent attendance, those students will not experience the lessons the teachers have prepared. With chronic absenteeism, we're seeing problems requiring solutions that are beyond the purview of individual schools. So what is the solution? A support staff member once told me that the foundation for student success is a triangle with teachers, family, and communities working together. Without one of these pillars, student success becomes increasingly challenging. I've thought about this in terms of in-seat attendance. Part of student success includes attending school. We need to come together as individual schools, their neighborhoods, and corresponding LEAs with a concerted effort to produce specific policies or programs in order to see changes. Schools and programs that have a concentrated effort to engage the community and family members have been proven to have higher attendance and academic performance than other schools. For DCPS schools, Flamboyant provides these supports for schools to accomplish increased engagement. While I have yet to review the data regarding the positive impacts of Flamboyant with partnered schools, I am curious about the difference between attendance for schools that are and are not partnered Flamboyant. If this has a positive impact on attendance, DCPS should consider increasing schools partnered with Flamboyant. If not, we should create a district-wide model for increased engagement. Whichever the method the district chooses, I strongly urge DCPS to take action. Without any change, we will continue to see students struggle with success due to poor attendance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lambert?
Good evening. My name is Louis Lambert, and my son attends Hardy Middle School in Ward 7. I'd like to discuss the DCPS visitors policy. I've not been able to find a specific policy for sports or after-school activities and have been directed to the DCPS visitor policy dated January 2017. This policy states on page 4, paragraph 5, that visitors must follow the instructions provided to them at the security station and as directed by the principal. School security may limit the areas and time during which the visitors may access the building, but not in a manner that will unreasonably infringe upon the rights of a parent or parent's designee to observe or support their child in the classroom. The scope and duration of the visit will correspond with the purpose of the visit. So even though the policy states that the school may not unreasonably infringe upon a parent's or guardian's right to observe their child, that my school is, from the principal to the superintendent, have done so since the beginning of the school year. Also, no one is aware of the policy from the security guards all the way up to the superintendent and even members of the chancellor's staff that I've been in contact with. I've continuously been told that that's what I've been heard on all levels from the school staff. The staff took weeks passing me from person to person until finally the superintendent himself said it was a judgment call for him. I would like to ask the Board of Education what the policy is for schools to go against the actual DCPS visitors policy approved back in January of 2017. On an additional note, the schools infringe upon the rights of parents and guardians. The schools are only stopping parents from observing their children at indoor activities. There's no one stopping anyone from watching children at outdoor activities. I have even mentioned to the security guards, assistant principal, and principal that people with no children were watching children play soccer and tennis. Though the superintendent said that he was making the call to close all sports practices to the public, he is choosing to only close indoor sports practices to the public. This means the safety of our children taking part in outdoor activities have no one looking out for their safety and well-being. So I'd like to know, is there a plan to update the visitors policy that's listed since January of 2017 to meet the rules the Ward 7 leadership and chancellor staff are using in lieu of the current DCPS visitors policy?
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to member questions to the students. Representative Bernstad.
Hi, I think I only have one question, and it's more of just a clarification, because I think I got lost somewhere. Ms. Barada, could you explain just specifically like what Flamboyant is and how schools are getting connected with them now, and like what the process for that is? So how would like DC Public Schools encourage that to happen more?
Sorry about that. Clarifying that. Flamboyant is an organization that schools can partner with that provides support for teachers and parents. For example, I know teachers that work for a Flamboyant school have done the week of the opening week of professional development. They do home visits. I know parents are also incentivized to go to parent-teacher conferences. So they provide different types of supports for teachers and for parents for engagement.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question, so I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Representative Bernstad. Representative Washington.
Okay, hi. Thank you all for coming. I had a few things this time. To Senorita Lake, what you were saying, it sounds amazing, and I know we were talking about it a bit before we resumed our meeting, but it sounds great, and I'd love to be a part of it or help in any way that I can. And then to the, I can't remember your name, but the man in the blue suit, whose son you said goes to Hardy. I was wondering, what would you like to see in the visitor policy? Like, what changes would you like to see? Would you like more adult chaperones? Because I know you said that there's not.
Well, either abiding by the policy and allowing people, parents, designees to attend sporting practices to see how their child is being done, which is what the policy states, or change the policy to make it read what the superintendent, chancellor, principals are enforcing and just completely 100% closing practices, but only indoor practices. Anybody in DC can go and watch someone play a sport at an outdoor.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it. I yield the rest of my time.
Representative O'Leary.
Yes, I have a question for all three of you, which affects all three of you. The system has a policy that you can't get lower than 50 on as a score in a classroom. Does that have anything to do with attendance? This for DCPS.
Could you repeat the policy that you said about the 50%?
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the 50%?
No, the grade, you can't get lower than 50%.
Okay, I'm not sure about that specific policy and if that is attendance related. I do know though that they have done studies that student performance has improved with better attendance. So I'm not sure if they have changed that because of attendance. I do not have any information regarding that policy.
Okay, do either of you know about that? Okay. The other question is, do students have, I mean, is it still the way it was during the pandemic where if a student comes to class like 5 minutes before class is over, they're still counted as being present?
Yes. So tardies are still included as present. I believe there was a certain percentage that cut off of how long you are to be in the school day. I believe it's 60%. If you are attending school for 60% of the school day, you are counted as present. So many times I have, and I've also heard stories of other teachers where students would come in at the conclusion of an hour and a half English language arts block, and it would not count against them at all in their
Thank you.
Attendance.
I'm over my time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Representative Chang.
Ms. Brada, would you elaborate on what Flamboyant is doing that you think we should replicate?
Okay, so I don't have all the details of Flamboyant. I do know some of the things that they do, such as home visits, which I do think is a very useful tool, especially the first week of professional development before school even starts. It gives them a chance to engage with the parents and meet them in a setting that they're comfortable with. It doesn't necessarily have to be their home if parents aren't comfortable with that. There are good meetings where people have accepted meetings in a public place, whatever works for them. That's definitely one. I've also read about compensating parents for meetings. I'm not sure about compensation, but I definitely agree with some form of incentive for them to come to these parent conferences so that they can be more involved. Some of the student engagement and community engagement pieces that they have, I don't have all of the details of the program, but the ones that I have heard, one of the biggest components that I would like to see is the conferences, in-person conferences, home visits.
And in contrast or in comparison, how is your school doing the public engagement outside of what Flamboyant does?
We don't have any hard data with public engagement, but what you mean with family engagement, you mean? Our numbers with conferences shift. It depends on each classroom. Sometimes parents have a closer relationship with more veteran teachers. So I don't have the hard data and numbers on that. Sorry to, but yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Parker.
Less a question, more a comment. Ms. Barada, it's good to see you. I'm a big fan of Flamboyant's work. And one thing to note, they do an extensive amount of work of building parent literacy around learning standards and just how students are doing in school, because often there is a gap between a parent's understanding of new math, for instance, and the teacher. And so that perhaps could be something that this body explores in the future. Senorita Lake, it is good to see you as well. I really appreciate you just elevating the challenges that many of our students are facing, your concern and care. So it's more a comment, less a question, but I also just want to acknowledge you all for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Parker. Representative Reed?
Sure. For the parent, I know, what is it? The in-school visitation policy is now, after COVID, some maybe changes or something may have taken effect. I know historically we've gotten feedback or follow-up for parents when they come with questions, so I'm hoping that we can do that as a board again for the gentleman here. And Ms. Barada, I know you're here for attendance, but I'm having a transportation question because I know previously you reached out to me about field trips and transportation. In light of Ms. Wack's testimony about the safety issues, can you provide any further context related to securing buses, the whole field trip process? And I know equity was mentioned because I was thinking, are we even having field trips? So.
I don't believe there is a consistent district-wide policy that is being enforced, and I don't think that if there is, I don't think that it is largely known to teachers, and so there have been incidents in which schools have provided their own guidelines as to what would be allowed for a field trip and certain deadlines and requirements. So I would like to see more clarity on the district's end and providing that information for teachers. I do know that I myself am a little confused as to why there is a lot of school buses on New York Avenue sitting in a lot when we are spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars, sometimes even up to $800 for a bus for a school trip. Bus money we don't have. When it comes to the new policy that they enforced, our school personally does not require the teachers to check that. That is the principals doing it, but we have been clearly told that the schools are responsible for checking that information. Yes.
Representative Wattenberg?
Thanks to all three of you for coming. Just very quickly, Senorita Lake, have a great break. Sorry you are exhausted by teaching. I know you are not alone. I hope you'll come back. And meanwhile, I hope that you will be in touch with Sally Schwartz, who is here, who has this idea of pulling kids together in different kind of hubs. She talked about the language hub, but there's also broader ideas, so you guys should connect. And if you need help doing that, I would be happy to do that. Ms. Brada, the only thing I have to say on that is, you know, the Deputy Mayor of Education for a long time had this attendance task force, you know, every day counts. And it's been disbanded. I think there was a sense that it wasn't getting things done or it wasn't having success. I don't really understand, but you may want to touch base there.
I've also wondered when there was a policy change, because I've heard anecdotally from teachers who were alumni of the system that if they came to school at a certain time that they would be placed in a temporary location until the lesson was over. I'm not saying I fully support that, but I'm saying that I do appreciate some form of accountability for students who are repeatedly late with no excuse or anything like that. So it's something that I also.
I don't know the answer. Yeah. I do know it's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they would know. And actually, you should really talk to the folks there. And again, if you don't know them, I can give you a name.
Yeah,
they'll talk to you if they choose.
Thank you so much.
And then to you, sir, I just want to say I had not heard that, so I'm happy you came and told us that. And along with Representative Reed, I hope we can get some more information on it.
Thank you, Representative Weinberg. Representative Gasoy?
Thank you all for being here. I don't have any questions, but actually I do. I'm sorry, Ms. Barada. do you know if your school leadership has done any surveying of families about like what the root causes?
We have a dedicated staff member, across from our office who consistently contacts parents of families who are chronically absent, and we take notes and ask them where we take attendance and follow up. We as a school have really done, I think, all that we can do. And so we are at a loss as to next steps and how else we can engage more parents or even have any form of responsibility and consistency. We've tried even having like raffles for attendance and
So incentivizing it, but I guess I'm wondering if in their communication with families have any patterns arisen in terms of causes, like why are families or why are kids coming late or not attending?
So I haven't had an in-depth discussion about what we're seeing school-wide. I do know from my experiences that I get a plethora of reasons. It could be doctor's notes, they're out sick, sometimes a death in the family, and then sometimes I hear things like car trouble, and I won't see the child for like 2 weeks. So I'm unsure of if there is a consistent pattern. I haven't had that discussion with our staff school-wide as to what we're seeing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Vice President Thompson.
Thank you to the panel. First, I should say, Mr. Lambert, it is news to me that Hardy is in Ward 7. I actually think you have a phenomenal rep in Representative Chang over there in Ward 2. I'm not saying I won't talk to you. I'm happy to talk to you about all the concerns, and I hear you, but I want you to know who your representative is. It's Representative Chang. Second, Senorita Lake, it's always a pleasure to see you. I know you said you're not showing up as a teacher, but I always appreciate you showing up for young people more broadly. And thank you for just sharing your ideas about civic engagement. Ms. Barada, on attendance, and actually you or Senorita Lake could chime in here. I'm curious, I've heard conversations around the idea of attendance value add. What does that mean? Essentially, some schools work really hard to get kids in the door and make sure they're there showing up consistently, and others just have kids who show up. The idea is essentially that we should be capturing that effort from schools. Is that something that makes sense? Is that law? Should we give schools credit for that? Should we focus on it at all?
I'm going to say quickly, I think you guys have to give schools more budget for global experiences. We got to get the kids and the parents to go abroad. The way that kids learned here in America during the pandemic was like mind-blowing to my brother in Dominican Republic. So I think if you incentivize programs abroad, if you give parents, like I think you were saying, some parents get money to come to meetings. Okay, well, let's tell the parents that we're going to give you lessons to become an entrepreneur. Because a lot of our kids' parents in Ward 7 and 8, they have their own little businesses. So that's the way, because the school is not community-based in DC, but it doesn't make sense. So I think you guys have to invest in giving money for the kids to get out, and the parents too, because a lot of our parents, they missed out on their experience, so they want to get that good connection. So it's rebuilding and revamping the educational system.
All right. I think that concludes our panel. So thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thanks for staying so late, including to Mr. Lambert's son.
That is all of our public witnesses.
Okay. I want to thank all of our public witnesses for their comments tonight. We deeply appreciate you coming to the Old Council Chambers in person to hang out with us. And as I noted in my opening remarks, we continue to work on ways to better assist a hybrid meeting posture, and hope we will be able to do that again very, very soon. Moving on. Members, at this time, we will move on to votes on our state resolutions. As a reminder to the viewing public, state resolutions may be submitted as an item for consideration by any member, provided the submission is made at least 7 business days prior to the date of the meeting in which it is considered. And the resolution includes, at minimum, a title and/or description, supplementary material as necessary to explain its need, and a statement on how the resolution will increase equity in education in the District of Columbia. The State Board has also recently adopted the practice of sending all state resolutions to the Student Advisory Committee for their review and consideration. Thank you to OSSI and President Sutter, who were at the most recent Student Advisory Committee on Monday evening to represent, thank you, and thank you to Leaf. Thank you, to present on some of this evening's resolutions. All of this evening's resolutions were presented. For each of the state resolutions, I will look for a motion and a second. This will be followed by Mr. Jew reading each into the record. After Mr. Jew reads the resolution into the record, I will turn to our student representatives to share the Student Advisory Committee statements. This will be followed by member discussion in 2-minute rounds of statements before roll call votes are conducted. Okay. Our first state resolution is SR 22-12 on early literacy priorities. Representative Chang, I'm going to ask you if you want to make a motion, but you're not at your microphone. Quickly, hustle. I don't have hold music.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, well, a motion has been moved, and there is a second, Representative O'Leary. Thank you. The motion is properly moved and seconded. Mr. Jew will read the resolution into the record.
All right, here we go. My reading voice. Favorite part of the evening. State Board of Education resolution on early literacy priorities, SR 22-12. Whereas decades of research in cognitive science and neuroscience reveal much about how people learn to decode and comprehend, and there has been growing consensus and an increased sense of urgency on how and what to teach in order to improve literacy outcomes, including 1, a Tier 1 instructional approach known as, quote, structured literacy, based on the vast, quote, science of reading research. 2, early intensive effective Tier 2 intervention for students who do not make adequate progress with such instruction. And 3, a focus on building background knowledge across content areas to improve reading comprehension. Whereas the DC State Board of Education prioritizes the improvement of reading outcomes for DC students, and in support of this has, 1, established an Education Standards Committee, which dates back to February 2021, and has since focused its work on improving literacy statewide. 2, named Ward 2 representative and current chair of the Education Standards Committee, Alistair Chang, to the National Association of State Boards of Education Early Literacy Work Group and the Office of the State Superintendent of Education Early Literacy Task Force to lead on work related to the enhancement of literacy outcomes for district residents or district students. 3, shared the vision and recommendations of the multifaceted literacy improvement plan developed by the cross-sector Early Literacy Task Force convened in 2021 to 22 by Representative Chang. And 4, recently transmitted a letter to the DC Education Research Collaborative asking that they focus their research on early reading instruction, especially on the implementation of the Council of the District of Columbia Bill 23-150. Whereas National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, results in English language arts from 2022 revealed that the district's 4th grade students scored 8 points below district 4th grade students in 2019 and 9 points below the 2022 national average. Whereas in school year 2021-22, only 30% of District of Columbia Public School and public charter school students in grades 3 through 8 scored at or above grade level on the ELA PARC assessment. And whereas significant disparities in performance exist between white students and students of color, such that in school year 2021-22, 79% of white students, 31% of Hispanic Latinx students, and 20% of Black African American students met or exceeded ELA PARC expectations. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education recommends the district focus on providing the following regarding early literacy. 1, intensively training all district pre-kindergarten through 5th grade teachers and leaders in structured literacy using states with the strongest reading improvements as a guide. 2, supply evidence-based, culturally responsive, high-quality curricular materials for all classrooms, including materials for screening, assessment, and interventions. And 3, provide families, caretakers with access to clear, accurate, and up-to-date data on their child's reading performance. And be it further resolved that the DC State Board of Education recommends the district make financial investments in early literacy that fulfill the following: support reading instruction with sufficient time and resources to plan, learn, and adapt to evidence-based practices, strengthen local pipelines to hire, train, and retain reading instructors and literacy coaches, align investments in professional development, curriculum, and assessment, align investments in formal, non-formal, and informal literacy learning opportunities, and finally, support sequential, systematic knowledge building with materials, training, and adequate instructional time in history, social studies, civics, science, and the arts.
Thank you. I understand that President Sutter would like to make a statement for the record at this time. We will start with her and then move to any further discussion on the resolution. Are you able to chime in, President Sutter? I know she's on a bit of a delay, but I hear a voice, but it's very faint. Yeah. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, President Sutter. From the dais, Vice President Thompson, would you like me to see if there are any member comments, or would you like to call on them?
I can call them. We can start with the student representatives. Representative Bernstein.
We just have our Student Advisory Committee statement on the resolution. I want to give a little context, because I guess the Student Advisory Committee now is operating in a different capacity than we did the past 2 years because we're virtual. Now that we're meeting in person, we don't have the capacity to do virtual attendance, but as we all know, every resolution must be presented in front of the Student Advisory Committee, and the committee will also provide recommendations and count individual votes of committee members. So if it's unanimous, we won't mention it, or maybe we will, I don't remember how I wrote this, but whatever. We'll mention if it's unanimous, but we'll also give a specific vote. There was about 21 people, student committee members in attendance, but we're also committed to giving recommendations for both the resolution itself and for further consideration, which we haven't always done in the past. So that's just something to look out for, and I'll pass it to Representative Washington for the statement.
So, in response to the SR 22-12 on early literacy priorities, which addresses the need for more structured literacy training in grades K through 5, the Student Advisory Committee is in unanimous support of the passing of this resolution. Members of the committee forwarded the following recommendations for further consideration by the board: expanding the wording of the resolution and/or following up about 6 through 12 literacy, and changing language about intervention to specify whether any of it is specific to those with learning disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you for reading the statement into the record. Was there other discussion? So I'll go to Representative O'Leary and then to Representative Chang.
As someone who's been teaching reading for over 50 years now, and looking at these figures about the test results, we're in an emergency. And the only way that the scores are going to go up is when reading becomes very important in every classroom. So I'm all in favor of whatever it takes to raise our literacy rates.
Representative Chang.
Thank you. I want to echo President Sutter in thanking those groups like Decoding Dyslexia who have been championing and leading this work for many years. I'm particularly grateful in this work to have been able to also get support and advice from the Washington Teachers Union, Empower Ed, PAVE, Empower K-12, many teachers, including Sam Bertocci and Maya Baum, Councilmember Pinto for her leadership on this work at DC Council, Dr. Grant, and all of my colleagues here for supporting and moving this work forward. What I'm particularly grateful about in the way that we have approached this work is understanding that there is no one-size-fits-all for this, and that there is no silver bullet, but that there are evidence-based practices with which we can adopt to move this work forward. And really honored to be authorized by my colleagues here to represent the Board of Ed for this task force, and excited to get to work and equipped with this resolution as well. So thank you.
Representative Wattenberg.
Thank you, and also I think it's a terrific resolution, and I'm so glad that everybody was able to come together and work on this. I have two amendments that I wanted to propose and see if people would find this acceptable. One is in line 62, where we are listing the specific things that we want the investments on. We have talked a lot about the importance of intervention, and I did a number of edits on this, and so we can definitely blame this on me, but I see we do not have one on intervention, which I think really has to be a high priority here. So I would add as a line, line 9, I think it was line 62. It would say supporting early, intensive, adequate intervention for students who do not make adequate progress with Tier 1 or Tier 2 instruction. And let me just say on that, part of what happens now is students may get referred for some sort of extra help, but it might be once a week, it might be twice a week, it might be for 20 minutes, it might be for 30 minutes. And if you really want to address these issues, you're talking about way, way more than that. If people go outside of the school system for it, it's often every day for an hour for many, many weeks. So that really needs to be addressed. So that's one. The second is, well, I'll tell you where it is in a moment. It's where, I think it's line 78, where we talk about the materials. And at one point it said in there that the materials were to be high quality instruction materials as rated by Ed Reports or other research-based criteria that include research-based criteria regarding decoding and knowledge building.
So there
Okay,
there aren't. So this resolution has 62
All right,
lines.
hold on. Are you looking at it?
Yeah, they're in the binders. No one does.
Line 48, sorry, would be line 48, supply evidence-based, culturally responsive, high-quality curriculum materials for all classrooms. In paren, high-quality instruction materials as rated by Ed Reports or other research-based criteria that include research-based criteria or other research-based criteria regarding decoding and knowledge building. And that is just so that it's very specific. There is a group that measures it based on this. I think it's the only one that does it based on the knowledge building. So I'm sending all that in an email to everybody. So basically, if there's interest in that, I think it's important to have them. If I'm looking at Representative Chang, if we can do that and we're all supportive of it, I would love to get that in. If not, I'm not going to make it a big deal, but. So there should be an email, but one of them is a final bullet that talks about intervention, intensive intervention. It would just go in that final section. And the other one is it's the second to last bullet in the line 48. It's just adding something that dropped out at some point, high-quality instructional materials as rated by Ed Reports or other research-based criteria regarding decoding and knowledge building. So that's specific, that we're saying it's not, we want somebody independent rating it.
I don't know if other members have discussion.
Yeah.
I know I have a reaction to this, but I don't know if others do.
My reaction is because I know I read this before and provided feedback, and I would like to see those recommendations even with the things I offered, either we, turn it over to the task force to handle, because those were some of the things that you mentioned to me that the task force would handle my recommendations that aren't in here, which is fine, or we postpone this resolution until I can see the language. Sorry.
So I'm not for postponing it. I just emailed it to people. That may not be adequate, but it's for intensive intervention, which I think it was in an earlier draft.
I'm calling on people for discussion. So I'll say my reaction. I like that suggestion. So thank you, Representative Reed. I actually disagree with the edit to line 48 citing Ed Reports, not because I don't think they're research-based, but because they don't actually, the culturally responsive and affirming is not something they have there's a weak spot there. That's not something they do. Totally high-quality instructional materials, all of those things, standards align, but Ed Reports would be entirely too limiting when it comes to making sure our brown and black kids are seen in their materials, and that's super important to me. But I do. That being said, I agree with Representative Reed as far as the path forward here, and I don't know if there's further discussion.
I mean, I would
Is that a yes? Further discussion, Representative Wattenberg?
Yes, please.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just say that on the Ed Reports, the way it's worded is it's additive, it's not limiting. So it's culturally responsive and the having the other information. I think just in the interest of getting it done, let's just adopt it. And but I wanted people to be aware that those are two things that are not in there, and I hope that, and we have talked about them, and they should be a major part, so that can be part of the record.
Okay, so I'm going to close discussion. I want to note that Representative Wattenberg is withdrawing her recommendation for an amendment. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. All right. I am actually now going to call for the vote. All in favor, please say Oh, wait,
So
we have to
we'll do a roll call vote.
you wanted a roll call vote? Yes, we'll do a roll call vote. You want to call the roll?
I can do the roll, yeah. Representative Bernstad,
Aye.
Representative Washington, Representative Gasoy, Representative Chang,
Aye.
Representative Wattenberg, Representative O'Leary,
Aye.
Representative Parker,
Aye.
Representative Reed,
Aye.
Representative Thompson,
Aye.
and President Sutter, who's on a delay. I imagine she votes yes, such that she said it in her statement. Vice President Thompson, you have a unanimous vote in support of approval.
All right, so the motion is unanimously approved. Our next resolution is SR 22 dash, oh, wait a minute. 13, yes, 22-13 on recommendations related to public safety. I actually will move this resolution. Is there a second? All right, thank you, Representative Gasoy. It has been properly moved and seconded. Mr. Jew will read this resolution into the record.
State Board of Education resolution on recommendations related to public safety, SR 22-13. Whereas public safety guarantees people's well-being and safeguards from crime, disaster, and other threats. Whereas government agencies and institutions should be held accountable and responsible for treating public safety as a human right to all, regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, national origin, age, or disability. Whereas members of the DC community, including youth, have been exposed to high levels of physical violence, which has caused an increase of concern for their public safety. Whereas the Vice President and Ward 7 representative of the DC State Board of Education, Ebony Rose Thompson, raised her concerns related to public safety at the September 7th working session, advocating for increased and immediate protection for her constituents and all residents in DC. Whereas members across wards have heard from constituents that there has been a significant increase in student safety concerns in and around their school buildings. Whereas there are multiple initiatives to prevent and interrupt community violence, such as Cure the Streets, Safe Passage, and Peace for DC. However, there seems to be little communication or coordination between these efforts. Whereas the State Board held a panel on the topic of public safety at its October 19th public meeting to discuss ongoing instances of violence occurring in DC, especially discussing the effects that violence has on youth and hearing directly from representatives of the Office of the Student Advocate, Office of the Attorney General, Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, Growing Up, and Penn DMV. Whereas the panelists illuminated the varying levels of work happening in the district at the government, school, community, and student level, the need for safe and consistent funding streams to support public safety work, and the necessity and importance of maintaining active engagement with schools and communities. Whereas the State Board held a debrief on the panel at its November 2nd working session and discussed the importance of interagency coordination as it relates to incidents, reports, and student safety. And whereas at the November 2nd working session, the Office of the Student Advocate presented its 2022 annual report and noted that about 13% of their requests for assistance were related to student safety. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education recommends the district's immediate adoption of recommendations made by the Office of the Student Advocate. 1, increase funding for the Safe Passage, Safe Blocks initiative. 2, transition from school resource officers to safety advocates. 3, provide funding for restorative justice coordinator in every DCPS and public charter school. And 4, adapt existing street harassment trainings for students in grades 6 through 12. Be it further resolved that the DC State Board of Education recommends that the Deputy Mayor for Education and other relevant agencies take the following actions related to the public safety of all DC communities. 1, ensure safe passage workers receive training in violence interrupter best practices. 2, develop standardized communication and coordination plans between all safe passage workers, school leaders, and other institutions responsible for the safety of students. 3, ensure student voice in the decision-making process and support youth-led social media campaigns that speak to student safety. 4, provide mental health supports for students after instances of violence. 5, ensure adequate and equitable funding for social, emotional, mental health support, resources, and programming in every DCPS and public charter school to create safe learning environments. 6, ensure each school hires at least one full-time alternative staff person trained in best practices like restorative justice and mediation. 6, create a campaign similar to the Everyday Counts Task Force that puts together a safety advocacy team heavily informed by youth and student voice to study, campaign for, and ensure data-driven strategies for elementary, middle, and high school levels to reduce youth violence, empower youth to be role models, and ensure the safety of students and communities. 7, develop professional learning opportunities for school staff in violence interruption and conflict resolution. And 8, develop standards for success within safe passage training. And be it finally resolved that the DC State Board of Education will reconvene a panel discussion on this topic on or before June 2023.
All right, thank you, Interim Director Drew. I understand President Sutter has a statement to read into the record at this time, so we will start with her, and then we will move to our students to begin discussion on the resolution. We can. Thank you, President Sutter. I'm going to move on to Representative Barnstad, and then I'll go to the elected members for discussion.
Before I start, can I just check can I read this statement and then, like, on behalf of the committee, and then provide my own?
Yes, you may.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Perfect.
I figured both. Yes.
Because they're distinct. So this is the first time in a while that the SAC has not had a unanimous vote on something. In response to SR 22-13 on recommendations related to public safety, the Student Advisory Committee votes 20-1 in support of the passing of this resolution. I want to be very clear. The following recommendations are recommendations submitted by different individuals. So there may have been just one person supporting one recommendation, or many people supporting one, but we're just including all of them. Some of the line changes that are printed, some of the lines that are printed are incorrect, just because, like, I think it looks a little different printed. I'm not sure. On line 62 and 23, think about alternative language, possibly, quote, hires at least one full-time alternative staff to facilitate mediation, end quote, and possibly include something about the specific training they would receive. Add a portion that encourages an elementary school anti-violence campaign. Increase school autonomy in regards to SROs. On line 56, change language to encourage, since we're unsure of the distinction between safe passage and violence interrupters. This question came about because, or this final one came about because students were unsure of the difference between safe passage and violence interrupters, and the student that recommended this noted that there might be instances where it's better to be one or the other, so they didn't want it to feel like that was forced upon any individual. And now I would like to give my own statement, which I think is distinct from the committee statement. I am in full support of the passage of this resolution, and the State Board has heard a lot of testimony. I'm thinking specifically like July 2020, way before. I barely knew what the State Board was back then, but that SROs do not make students feel more safe. In fact, they make students feel more criminalized. And this is something that we talked about a lot last meeting of the SAC, is that it's especially because they have weapons. So I would actually disagree with the committee statement that I just gave on the Third point, which is increasing school autonomy in regards to SROs, I think the council is pretty clear that that's not something that they're going to do, or something that we should consider doing, rather just making sure that we're filling the gap. And I think transitioning from school resource officers to safety advocates gives us the tools we need to ensure that people have kind of relationships with people in those schools, but those relationships don't criminalize anybody. And I would also disagree with the final addition, which is on line 56, change violence to encourage. I think it's best if people receive training in both violence interruption and safe passage work, because I don't see a time where it would be bad for you to know both of those things, especially since it's kind of unclear, at least the way we understood it, it was kind of unclear what the distinctions were, that it doesn't seem like it's that many different steps. It's more just like unifying the system. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bernstein. I saw Representative O'Leary, and I'm curious if there's other discussion. Representative O'Leary.
I want to take a look at line 37 and 38, where it says, whereas the State Board held a debrief on the panel and discussed the importance of interagency coordination. This fabulous panel that we had and gave us just so much information, but we found that there wasn't interagency cooperation. And that's going to be essential for all of these things to work, is that people need to talk to each other, because they all were on their islands doing what they were doing, but they weren't talking to each other. So I think that's very important.
Is there other discussion? Representative Reed?
Yes, I need clarity. I understand the student statement that they're in support. What's happening with the 4 bullet points? Are this for future consideration or current consideration?
As I understood it, the students overwhelmingly voted in support and just wanted to list that these were the things that came up.
As subsequent things.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
as individual.
But we're voting on it as.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any others? Okay, I just want to make sure.
No, I want to vote. I'm ready to
Emily's
vote.
like, I want to vote. All right, awesome. I just want to say thank you to the board for wrestling with this, because it is not, it's not simple. It's also not solved. So I think the resolution is a step in the right direction. When I came to the board, I had nothing to offer. I was at a complete loss. So to go from a complete loss to some tangible recommendations, even if they are not all perfect, is something I have huge appreciation for. So thank you all. I am going to close discussion. And do you want to call the roll for the votes?
Yes, Vice President Thompson. Representative Bernstead?
Aye.
Representative Gasoy?
Aye.
Representative Chang? Aye. Representative Wattenberg?
Aye.
Representative O'Leary? Representative O'Leary, okay. Representative Parker? Aye. Representative Reed?
Aye.
Representative Thompson?
Aye.
And Representative Sutter? Again, I imagine that's an aye. Vice President Thompson, the vote on approval of SR 22-13 passes unanimously.
All right, thank you all. I'm going to move on to our next resolution. This resolution is SR 22-14 on approval of amendments to the District of Columbia's Community Service High School graduation requirement. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Representative Reed. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Representative Gasoy. A motion has been made and properly seconded. I'm going to ask Mr. Jew to read the resolution into the record.
State Board of Education resolution on approval of amendments to the District of Columbia's Community Service High School graduation requirement, SR 22-14. Whereas the Office of the State Superintendent for Education's regulations for graduation are codified in Chapter 22, Subtitle A of Title V of the District of Columbia Municipal Regulations. Whereas Section 403A3 of the Public Education Reform Amendment Act of 2007 requires the DC State Board of Education to approve high school graduation requirements for the district. Whereas 5A DCMR Section 2203, which sets academic requirements for high school graduation, requires students to complete 1 hours of voluntary community service to graduate. Whereas the community service requirement for graduation was suspended by the Council of the District of Columbia for graduating students in 2020, 2021, and 2022 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Whereas at the working sessions before the DC State Board of Education on September 7th, October 12th, and November 2nd, 2022, OSSE presented draft concepts to 1, stagger the reimposition of community service hours requirement for 4 years to accommodate for the challenges created by the pandemic. 2, provide flexibilities for the community service requirement for students who transfer to DC local education agencies from outside of DC LEAs. And 3, clarify and broaden the definition of community service for purposes of accruing hours toward the graduation requirement. Whereas OSSE, in addition to engagements with the DC State Board of Education, conducted outreach with school and LEA leaders to solicit input on the proposed changes. Whereas OSSE, as a result of these engagements, will propose the following changes to 5A DCMR Section 2203. 1, the community service graduation requirement will be staggered by graduating year as follows. A, students graduating in 2023 shall be required to satisfactorily complete a minimum of 12 hours of community service to graduate. B, students graduating in 2024 shall be required to satisfactorily complete a minimum of 50 hours of community service to graduate. C, students graduating in 2025 shall be required to satisfactorily complete a minimum of 75 hours of community service to graduate. And D, students graduating in 2026 or thereafter shall be required to satisfactorily complete a minimum of 100 hours of community service to graduate. 2, high school students who transfer to a DC LEA from outside a DC LEA shall have to complete the following number of community service hours. A, students who transfer during their senior year shall have the community service graduation requirement waived. B, students who transfer during their junior year or as a rising senior shall have to satisfactorily complete 25 hours of community service. C, students who transfer during their sophomore year or as a rising junior shall have to satisfactorily complete 50 hours of community service. And D, students who transfer during their freshman year shall have to satisfactorily complete 75 hours of community service. 3, the definition of community service shall be changed from, quote, the specific volunteer community service project shall be established by the LEA, end quote, to, quote, LEAs shall approve unpaid community service conducted in person or virtually that is intended to provide a societal benefit through activities organized by the school, organized by students, or organized by individuals outside the school, including through a government, nonprofit, or for-profit entity, end quote. And 4, required community service hours to transfer between district LEAs when a student transfers schools. Whereas OSSE will solicit additional feedback on the emergency and proposed compulsory education and school attendance regulations during the notice and comment period, which shall commence with the approval of this resolution. I believe that's a mistake. Whereas OSSE will thoroughly consider all of the comments received throughout the public comment period. And whereas the DC State Board of Education has considered the proposed revisions to the community service graduation requirements in 5A DCMR Section 2203 and finds that the revisions established a fairer and more equitable hours requirement for students impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, provide reasonable flexibilities for transfer students, and improves the definition of what constitutes community service for purposes of graduation. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education approves the district's emergency and proposed regulation to change the community service graduation requirement in Section 2203, Chapter 22, Subtitle A of Title V of the District of Columbia Municipal Regulations as proposed by the State Superintendent. And I will clarify, I do believe that lines 64 through 66 as printed in members' packets is a mistake, and that clause should likely be related to the community service emergency and proposed regulations, not those of the education and school attendance regulations which the board previously approved. So we'll make sure that that would be technically changed.
Thank you, Interim Director Jew. I understand President Sutter also has comments related, so we'll kick off the discussion with her, and then we'll follow the same procedure for discussion. President Sutter.
Serving in their faith community, volunteering in their neighborhood, or engaging in service learning as part of their high school coursework.
Thank you, President Sutter. I'm coming to you, Representative Bernstein.
Okay, please excuse the typos in this one. In response to SR 22-14, on approval of amendments to the District of Columbia's Community Service High School graduation requirement, the Student Advisory Committee votes 17-2 in support of the passing of this resolution. This is the first resolution we voted on, so we have less votes than the other one. That's why there's a slight discrepancy in numbers.
Did you have comments or no?
No, I'm in support of this resolution.
Okay.
And I'm happy we're voting on it now instead of next month because we need to get it out of the way.
I just wanted to make sure. I didn't want to assume. Any further discussion? I see Representative Wattenberg. I see Representative Parker. Perfect. Wattenberg, Parker. O'Leary.
So I just want to say on this that I thought the conversation, the back and forth with OSSI was terrifically productive, and I want to thank Superintendent Grant and her staff for what really was, I think, the best back and forth conversation we've had between the board and OSSI on a substantive issue in the 8 years that I've been on the board. So I really appreciate it. The result, I think, is quite a good proposal, which greatly improves the quality of the community service that I think our students will be experiencing, because in the past we have heard some pretty bad experiences, and I think this will really try to deal with it. And it also deals with the reality that this year seniors aren't going to have a lot of time to deal with it, and it's a very tough post-pandemic year for them. So I really, really appreciate it, and I just want to say that.
Representative Parker.
In a moment of cognitive dissonance, I want to give two statements. One, I echo the applause for OSSI. I thought the process to get to this final product was a great one. It was efficient, it was collaborative, it was thorough, it was detailed, and I think, and I know the commitment to community service will be a benefit to all of our students. On the flip side, I just want to recognize what I heard from some of our student reps in those meetings and what I heard from Ward 5 students many years ago, that community service hour requirements still serve as a barrier. And so that is the cognitive dissonance, that I applaud this process, and I personally think it is important that our students commit to service, but I still hear time and time again from our students that it is a barrier, and I think that is food for thought for us as we move forward. And I'm still going to vote for it. So again, the cognitive dissonance. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative O'Leary.
I agree with both Representative Wattenberg and Representative Parker that this was a major step forward in our relationship with OSSI, and I hope that the steps continue.
I see Representative Bernstein trying to get back in there.
I just remembered one more thing. The Student Advisory Committee only actually got to engage with OSSI on this matter once, which I really appreciate the work that OSSI did with the board. To a certain extent, though, as student representatives, we can only communicate so much. So I think in the future, the SAC just needs to invite them in sooner. Normally, the process is invite them in once we have a completed resolution that's agreed upon by the board. But I worry that that process ultimately kind of disengages the committee because we're not able to give substantive reports. Like, as you noticed, there are, in the other two committee statements, there are like recommendations made, but because we got the them presented to us on Monday, I didn't have time to produce any like amendments or anything before today's vote, because there wasn't enough turnaround time for us to submit those. So I'm hoping in the future we could figure out a way to do this process, which still allows resolutions to get passed in a timely manner, but also like allows for student engagement to be taken into consideration with enough time for there to be actual like substantive changes.
Thank you, Representative Bernstein. Other discussion, Representative Wattenberg?
I just want to support Representative Bernstad's point halfway. I think it's terrifically important that they get to have the early opportunity to engage with OSSI. And I wish we'd done that, and I really think that ought to be something we do. I think it is probably hard to do it on every resolution. The reality is you are the representative for those students here. And I say that because if we you just can't put that many strictures in the way of a resolution. So I am 100% for what you're saying on the OSSI piece.
Very brief, I promise.
I think I'm going to invite discussion on the resolution, and we can take a very substantive conversation offline about how to better engage students and have a substantive conversation around resolution. And like that is a longer conversation, I think, that needs the space and time. But I'm going to invite any further discussion that impacts the vote of this resolution tonight now. Any other discussion? All right. Seeing none, I personally look forward to voting for this. I'm glad we have a solution in place that recognizes the pandemic, and we could do this instead of other bodies that tend to step in and usurp the power that we do have. So thank you to the board. Thank you to OSSI to coming up with something that makes sense and actually is more expansive than just addressing the pandemic emergency. Hopefully it makes it more accessible and a higher quality experience for students moving forward. So I'm going to ask the representative, I've elected you. I'm going to ask that Interim Director Jew call the roll for the vote. Thank you.
Representative Bernstad?
Aye.
Representative Chang? Aye. Representative Wattenberg?
Aye.
Representative O'Leary?
Aye.
Representative Parker?
Aye.
Representative Reed?
Aye.
Representative Thompson?
Aye.
And Representative Sutter has noted to me to note her aye in her statement as an affirmative. With that, the roll call vote passes unanimously in support.
All right. Thank you, representatives. Now, our final resolution is SR 22-15, on nominating Bernice Butler as Executive Director on the DC State Board of Education. I do believe that President Sutter, after a lot of hard work, would like to make this motion.
So moved. I'd like to move this resolution.
Thank you. I'd actually like to second it because we worked very hard. The motion has been properly moved and seconded. I will ask Mr. Jew to read the resolution into the record.
With pleasure. DC State Board of Education resolution on nominating Bernice Butler as Executive Director of the DC State Board of Education, SR 22-15. Whereas pursuant to the Article 3, Section 3.2 of the bylaws of the DC State Board of Education, an executive director shall be appointed by the State Board to support the State Board in all its operations and shall serve as head of agency for the State Board and retain responsibility for the agency's budget, human resources, procurement, contracting, risk management, information technology, and other administrative requirements. Whereas the position of Executive Director of the DC State Board of Education became vacant on June 10th, 2022, and whereas the State Board conducted a rigorous application and selection process that included screening of applicants, phone interviews, reviewing of writing assignments, and in-person finalist interviews from July through September 2022. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education nominates Bernice Butler to the position of Executive Director and looks forward to fully supporting Ms. Butler in her new role that will begin on November 21st, 2022.
Thank you. We're going to follow the same procedure for discussion. I'm coming to President Sutter first, and then I'll work my way through student reps, elected reps.
I am thrilled to bring this appointment, naming Ms. Bernice Butler as the next Executive Director of the DC State Board of Education, to my colleagues for their consideration. Many of us had the pleasure of interacting with Ms. Butler during her interview process and were suitably impressed based on feedback from members, staff, and students alike. Ms. Butler has extensive experience as a leader, a strong record of education policy experience at the state and local level, and I am delighted to welcome her back to serving the district as she did during the early days of her career as a Capital City Fellow. I am enthusiastically voting yes tonight, and I'm sorry to be doing so from afar, Ms. Butler. I understand you are with us in the chambers, and I cannot wait to welcome you to staff next week.
Thank you, President Sutter. Representative Bernstein.
The Student Advisory Committee does not provide statements on issues of board governance, but I will say welcome, Ms. Butler.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to go Reed, Wattenberg, Parker. All right, sounds good.
Cool. But before I congratulate Ms. Butler, I want to say thank you to Alex Zhu for standing in the gap and really keeping the plane flying. Also want to thank the staff for doing double duty, triple duty, and I'm sure each of you have a special moment in all of our hearts. Darren, I just want to publicly thank you for just frequently taking notes, just anything. So I appreciate it, and I think it's just worth giving Mike time. Ms. Butler, we look forward to working, or I look forward to working, I think we all do, look forward to working with you and meeting with you and getting to know you. And I'm hoping based on, I didn't get the opportunity to participate in the panels, but hoping that I trust my colleagues have made a great choice and will appreciate your support as our new executive director.
Thank you, Representative Reed. Representative Wattenberg.
Yeah, I just want to say I was one of the state board members who was able to interview you in advance, and I'm very excited, terrifically excited that you're coming. I'm sorry that I will be going off the board not long after you come on, but I look forward to talking to you and with you and working with you until then, and I think the board is going to be very happy, so thank you. And I also want to, along with Representative Reed, just give enormous thanks to Mr. Jew, who stepped in. It was very hard. I was part of what was very hard. I know that, and we really appreciated it. And same to all of the staff. It's been a tough time. Transitions sometimes are, and we really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Parker.
I want to echo those congratulations and welcome you. I also want to echo the many thanks to our staff and Mr. Jew. I say often that the state board staff is among the best in the city, and I mean that. And I share that as an invitation as the incoming executive director to continue to innovate. In my time on the board, I've seen the board evolve in what we thought was possible. When I started, we weren't doing research, and then it became a norm. We were continuing to lead in conversations, and I'm quite confident, given your background, the recommendations, what I've heard, is that you're more than capable of leading the board in that direction. I'm really excited to following the board's work from a different vantage point, but wanted to just welcome you and just share how excited I am, and many are, for you to serve as the next executive director.
Okay, Representative O'Leary, did you? Or Chang? Somebody raised their hand. It's getting late. Representative Chang?
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mr. Zhu. Welcome. And that's it. Yeah.
All right. So before I call for the vote, I will say echo to all of those thank yous and two more. Thank you to Caitlin Ping. Let me tell you why. These things do not just happen. There is a method and a madness that makes the magic happen. In this case, a lot of that magic actually came from Caitlin. Because while Alex was holding us down, making sure the things that all of you all see happen, Alex cannot run an interview process for a position he holds. So someone on our staff had to do that, literally screened so many applications, made sure the process made sense, made sure the process was inclusive. So thank you to Caitlin. And thank you to President Sutter, because DCHR doesn't just magically do things either. So there were, just like we didn't magically get in this chamber because, government just works that way. So there was a lot of work that went into making this happen, and I'm so grateful it all happened because, as many people said, we have a small but mighty staff. They are amazing. They will only continue to be more amazing as we add people, and they deserve to have enough capacity and enough support. And while I look forward to the board building even more capacity past this, I'm so grateful that you are joining us. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for all our staff has done to get to this point. Alex, I don't know what we owe you. We owe you something, but words do not suffice. So thank you again. Now you want to get in, Representative O'Leary? Come on with it.
There's an old saying, I guess it's from the South, that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It ain't broke. You've got a great staff, and I can't wait for the next 2 years. But y'all know how I feel, so I'm not going to sit here and make you get all teary-eyed or anything.
Okay, so in lieu of tears, I'm going to call for votes. Let's go. Interim Director Ju.
Representative Bernstad.
Aye. Welcome.
Representative Chang.
Aye, welcome.
Representative Wattenberg.
Aye. Welcome.
Representative O'Leary.
Aye, welcome home.
Representative Parker.
Aye, welcome.
Representative Reed.
Aye.
Representative Thompson.
Aye. Welcome back.
Representative Sutter. Let's see if it comes through. All right, well, I know that it's a yes. So on approval of SR 2215, appointing Bernice Butler as the next Executive Director of the DC State Board of Education, the vote is unanimously in favor.
All right, thank you. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for getting through all of those resolutions, technical difficulties, and all delays. So thank you for that. Members, now that we have moved all resolutions, are there any items for new business or announcements? Representative Weinberg.
Yes, so I'm going to do what I've done the last 3 meetings, I think, which is to not insist that we take up the resolution on adopting, for the record, the letter that we sent to the Education Research Collaborative. It is late, so I'm not going to insist that we bring it up, but I will bring it up again in December. You all have a copy of all the different pieces of it. Thank you.
Representative
I have a
Parker.
question.
Yes.
Representative Wattenberg or someone, what is the confusion of the holdup? And maybe we could take this offline, but I don't think I'm understanding. Let's take it offline. Let's take it.
I mean, we can take it offline. I actually have a suggestion.
Okay, yes. I just don't want this to drag on for another public meeting.
We can take it offline. I do have a suggestion. So my suggestion is, assuming we have, for the full board, everyone will see, the equity statement, the student statement, and I actually would recommend some updated language since it has now been 2 meetings, just to reflect where the RPP's research agenda is, because the initial resolution actually kind of assumed they didn't have one yet, and given we've sent the letter, Director Bias Robinson has invited feedback to weigh in on the agenda. It might actually be helpful to continue to move the conversation forward. So I actually think it makes sense to update it so we can have that for December. So that would be my recommendation.
I'm just going to say, it's just important, we sent the letter and we need to adopt the letter. If somebody wants to create a new letter for a new adoption, that's fine. What I'm going to propose is that we adopt the letter as a resolution as I proposed in September.
So that was actually not for me, my
Okay,
discussion was not a response to the why, all the things. I'm just saying at this point, as you've noted, it's been 2 meetings, and we're at a different place in the conversation. And so I think it actually makes sense to continue to move it forward. I'm actually happy to provide some updated language, not to change the spirit, but just to reflect that we've gotten a response, there's an agenda now, and we should, acknowledge we're in a different place in the conversation. We can take that offline and people can say that's the right thing to do or not, or not. But we hear you that you will propose this for the agenda, and all the things will be there, and we'll take that up in December.
I'm proposing it now, so I just want to make sure that it gets on there. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Other discussion?
I was going to announce that the RPP draft agenda, the updated version is now in your inboxes.
Right.
And President Sutter has provided a Word document with your comments due by November 17th, probably COB, for folks to weigh in on that. Also, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but to clarify, Representative Wattenberg, were you saying that you're okay with the recommendation? And I just say that because tonight we heard honor people's work, and you've done a lot of work around this. So I just want to be clear on what you want.
Yeah, my hope was just to get it on the record that we had asked the Research Collaborative to focus on 2 things that we thought were important. That is the implementation of the Early Literacy Act adopted by the Council and the pandemic intervention. So the fact that they did or didn't now adopt an entire research agenda, that piece still needs to be on the record. That's so. I mean, we can have a longer letter that sort of responds to what is in the current agenda. But having read that agenda, I can assure you that would be a very long and very different response. And I think what we want to do is to put on the record the resolution. I mean, this goes back, so I had proposed having this resolution in September. And instead, President Sutter wanted to have a letter, which was fine.
Should we just do a vote move that can we put it to bed and just make a motion about yes, no, that this letter situation happens and call it a day?
So the letter.
Next time. Okay, thank you.
I don't need anything done right now.
Yeah, so the letter's been sent. We can put it on the agenda for December. It was not on the agenda tonight because it was actually withdrawn at the last meeting, and then all the things. So there was some confusion. We can move it. We can move it in December, and that's fine. Representative Parker. Okay, so we're done on this topic. There's other new business because I want new business. All right.
I think something that it would be great for the board to take up next month would just be the facility issues that are dragging on in many of our schools. Just today in Ward 5, parents were freaking out because the school doesn't have heat. I know that's not unique to Ward 5, but there do seem to be just a large number of issues across the board. And this is something I think we should just continue to keep top of mind and put pressure on our partners. I'm happy to draft language and do all the work and all that good stuff, but just putting that out there if anybody wants to collaborate on that.
Representative Burnside.
I have a separate piece of new business as well. I don't know what the process is for getting something added to the working session agenda, so I don't know if this is an appropriate time or place, but can we dedicate like 30 minutes to talking about Mr. Rosenberg's testimony today and brainstorming solutions to what we can do for non-Christian students who don't get time off for their holidays? Is that possible?
I'm not going to commit to 30, but we can talk
Okay,
about
just some.
the
I
working
don't-
session.
I just need some time.
As the person who is not the actual president, I'm not going to commit to, but I hear you.
15 minutes,
Yeah.
5, I don't care. Just some time.
All right, if this is announcement, so the Healthy Schools Facilities Network, that we actually had our first meeting. We'll bring up the notes and things with the network, but we actually convened the committee. I actually think this is something that will fall into that as well. We should probably talk about at the working session, like what it looks like to keep the board abreast of that work and like how we share learnings. But just so you all know, we did have our first meeting. I guess it's my sense of time is very bad, but I think within the last week or so. All right. If there is no
I
further.
move that we adjourn.
I was about to say, if there's no further new business, we can be adjourned. I need actually a second for that.
Second.
All right, or a third and a fifth and a fifth. We are adjourned.
Third.
Thank you.